Chapter 1507. There was quite a bit of information that was sent over, all of it showing how troublesome and terrifying this person was. Even Yang Chendong felt that this person was a bit troublesome. He had a feeling that this person's existence would greatly hinder his great plan of unifying the Timur Empire. Inform Chushi to come down and meet me. After Yang Chendong threw down these words to Badao Jiang, who was accompanying him, he continued to look through all of the information related to the Timur Empire in his hands. He was considering a suitable path of advance. Right now, it wasn't only their army that was rushing towards the Timur Empire. Apart from the 4 divisions of the world's #1 cavalry army, as well as the Russian division, all of the other 5-star army, totaling over 300,000, were converging here from all directions. There was no need to talk about the world's #1 cavalry army. They had already taken down the capital of the Ilkhanate, Buli-Tuching, and were preparing to take a small path to the rear of the Kazakh Khanate. They were going straight for the capital, striving to open up a path there. This way, they would be able to meet up with the 5-star army in the east. Once this matter was accomplished, it would be the same as opening up an important path for supplies. This would play a decisive role in prolonging the army's ability to fight. Even Yang Chendong didn't think that Tianhu's #1 cavalry army would do this. When he received the telegram, he was excited for quite a while. Ahuli's Russian division was currently clearing out the remnants of the Allied forces in the Ilkhanate. After several battles, the Allied forces could be said to have suffered successive defeats. The original 300,000 Allied forces were now reduced to less than 60,000. Ahuli, this valiant general, took responsibility for this matter. It had to be said that he was worthy of being someone who had once been a great Khan. He really did have a way of leading troops. According to the telegram, Ahuli had already fought against the Allied forces of the Ilkhanate 8 times, and suffered defeat once. Apart from these 2 armies, Yang Chendong had mobilized all of the forces he could currently mobilize. From this, it could be seen how much importance he attached to the Timur Empire. It could also be said that once the Timur Empire was taken down, the so-called Khanate alliance would be disbanded. What followed would be encirclement and suppression. This also meant that the Xianxia's territory had expanded by at least a third. And in order to achieve this goal, they had to get rid of the Timur Empire first. And if they wanted to destroy the Timur Empire, they had to get rid of Mandula too, who was a difficult general to deal with. Otherwise, if the army was really exhausted here and the provisions couldn't be transported up in time, once summer passed and winter came, they would only have one path left, which was to retreat. This also meant that all their previous efforts would be ruined in an instant. This was not something Yang Chendong could accept. In order to prevent things from developing in this direction, he had to attack fiercely and try to take down the Timur Empire in the shortest time possible. The Timur Empire's environment and landscape were very complicated. There were many deserts, and there were very few places that were suitable for cavalry to fight. It was completely different from the time when they were dealing with the Golden Horde, where both sides appeared in a decisive battle. That was how they achieved victory in the shortest time possible. Shaking his head, he carefully looked at the map and some information, but he could not find a place or opportunity for the decisive battle. Yang Chendong could not help but sigh. It seems that we can only push forward slowly. I hope that Tianhu and the others can succeed and join forces with the East Army to solve the urgent need for provisions. In the 15th century, most of the land of the Kazakh Khanate was separated from the Golden Horde and became part of the Yuebi Khanate. Later, some tribes broke away from the Yuebi Khanate's rule and were called escapees, or escapees, and gradually formed the Kazakh people. The Kazakh Khanate's territory was inhabited by nomadic Turkic people. It was because of this that they were people that could fight and were also people that liked to fight. The capital, Akamo, was also built more than a decade ago. Although it was called a city, it was actually just a slightly larger market. There were some walls made of earth around the city. They were not high, only about 1 zhang high. In the end, it was just for show. Because if a war really broke out, they did not expect to rely on these walls to defend anything. At that time, they would rush out on horseback with all of their belongings. This also allowed them to move faster. Unless they were completely surrounded, it would be very difficult to eliminate them. It was because of this that the 5-star army on the East Front could not find the main force to engage in a decisive battle. More often than not, when they received the news, they would rush over empty-handed. In the end, they could only move forward bit by bit and were unable to join forces with Yang Chendong on the West Front. Relying on this kind of fast-moving method, The Kazakh Khanate's Jainurbek Khan was not afraid of the five-star army's attack. As long as he received the news, he would immediately leave. When the other side missed, he would consider cutting off the five-star army supply line, thus forcing the other side to retreat and give up the territory that they had just occupied. This kind of strategy gave the five-star army an endless headache. Before they could eliminate the other side's strength, it was impossible for them to occupy those so-called earth walls. This was because unless they were heavily guarded, they would face the other side's counterattack at any time. Thus, there was the possibility of being swallowed up. This was the biggest problem in dealing with the Kazakh Khanate. The five-star army had outstanding bravery and elite cavalry, but they were still unable to deal with the other side. And all of this would change with the appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division led by Jianghu. With Wang Yanhong's help, the more than 40,000 brave warriors of the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Army set out from the Ilkhanate's capital, Tabuli Tuching, making a detour around the Timur Empire's territory, quietly cutting into the Kazakh Khanate's rear. Wang Yanhong was worthy of being a descendant of the Wang Yan clan. He was extremely familiar with the situation in this area. The path that he pointed out was indeed unknown. Along the way, they didn't encounter any traces of enemies. According to what he said, they would be able to enter the Kazakh Khanate's territory in at most half a month. Then, they would be able to reach Akamo City in 10 days. Then, they would be able to secretly deal a fierce blow to Janabek Khan and eliminate as much of the other side's strength as possible. The next 25 days would be the most crucial period. Their tracks absolutely couldn't be discovered. For this reason, Tianhu took the initiative to send a telegram to Yang Chendong, requesting the 6th young master's help and cooperation. This was because apart from being discovered by the Kazakh cavalry, Tianhu was also worried that they would be discovered by the Timur Empire's cavalry. After all, that Mandaratal wasn't a good person. Once he discovered their tracks, he feared that the entire 1st Cavalry Division would face the grim situation of being surrounded from all sides. After receiving Tianhu's telegram, Yang Chendong ordered the army to attack from all sides in order to divert Mandaratal's attention. At the same time, all of the Air Force's hot air balloons were deployed as guides. In other words, once the hot air balloons discovered the target, they could also drop explosive packs from the air before the five-star army's cavalry arrived. In short, they couldn't let the Timur Empire's soldiers be idle. They had to create a feeling of war everywhere. This way, they wouldn't have the time to care about anything else. This would create an even more favorable situation for the 1st Cavalry Division to advance. The five-star army launched a frenzied attack. Almost every day, there would be large and small-scale battles. Under Mandaratal's command, the 250,000 Timur Empire's cavalry also launched multiple attacks. Using their understanding of the environment, they started a game of hide-and-seek with the five-star army. They were very skilled in using Sun Tzu's art of wars. When the enemy advances, I will retreat. When the enemy retreats, I will disturb them. Just like that, half a month passed. The five-star army launched many attacks, but the results were few and far between. The army was also exhausted. Yang Chendong finally received a telegram from Tianhu. They had successfully passed through the Timur Empire and entered the Kazakh region. He ordered the army to retreat and find a safe place to rest and reorganize. After entering the Timur Empire, the five-star army's first attack ended. When the news of them stopping the attack reached the capital, Ahmet Khan Amur's face was beaming with joy. His frowning face for the past few months was swept away and he cheered a few times. On the same night, the entire capital fell into a carnival. Especially Great General Mandaratal, everyone killed sheep, ate meat, drank wine, and played all night. In contrast, the atmosphere in the five-star army's camps was somewhat gloomy. After attacking for half a month, the number of enemies destroyed was not even 10,000 cavalry. Moreover, the other side was already prepared. They had scorched the walls and cleared the field, so there was no harvest in terms of food. This was naturally rare for the five-star army. In the past, as long as they decided to attack, they would definitely gain a lot. This time, it was the 6th young master who personally gave the order, but they still got such a result. Many people couldn't accept it. In the end, they could only comfort themselves with the excuse that even immortals would take a nap, and the 6th young master wouldn't be too difficult. Beta Persei had already returned to Yang Chendong's side with the Black Cavalry. In the past half a month, he had been tormenting himself a lot, but unfortunately, he couldn't touch the enemy's main force at all. When he finally found the enemy's figure, the enemy would drill into the mountains, making it impossible for him to chase after them. Beta Persei didn't like this kind of fighting method where he couldn't find an opponent at all. In the end, he had no choice but to return to Yang Chendong's side. As soon as he returned, he heard the voices of the soldiers below. There were actually people who dared to doubt the young master. This was something that Beta Persei couldn't tolerate. He secretly called Qiu Vi, Dao Shao, Ba Daojiang, and the other leaders of the Black Cavalry, and asked them to find those who were suspicious. He wanted to teach a few of them a lesson and punish them according to the law. But for some reason, Yang Chendong found out about this matter. He called the Black Cavalry and stopped them in public. Their mouths are on other people's bodies. We can't interfere with what they think. As long as it doesn't affect the morale of the army, we don't need to care. At least, whether they are right or not depends on the final result. Don't worry. Chapter 1508. Yang Chendong said these words so confidently, but when they fell into the ears of Beta Persei and the others, they had no choice but to suppress the anger in their hearts. But at the same time, this confidence infected them. The matter of Tianhu entering the Kazakh Khanate is top secret. In order to prevent it from being leaked, Yang Chendong didn't even tell Beta Persei about it. It's not that he doesn't trust them, but he's worried that after telling them, these people will talk about it in a moment of happiness. If this news gets out, it will be bad. Since it's easy to cause all kinds of problems, it's better not to say it. It just so happens that he also took this opportunity to see what kind of performance the other senior generals in the army will have. If someone is full of complaints because of a moment of dissatisfaction, or even has other ideas, it's tantamount to a pleasant surprise, and he can get rid of such a black sheep. For this reason, a total of 120 intelligence personnel were secretly sent to the various armies and began to investigate the reaction of all sides. Time passed day by day like this. 4 days later, outside the general's mansion in Herat City, Chuashij came with 2 jonins to collect some things. Before the war began, they were sent here to carry out the decapitation operation and get rid of the great enemy, Mandaratu. But from the moment he received this task, Chuashij knew that this task is not easy to complete, or even impossible to complete. However, even though he knew this, he still had to come because this was Yang Chendong's intention. No matter what kind of thoughts this Han held, since he had spoken, he had to carry it out. Just like Yang Chendong never believes in aliens, Chuashij also doesn't completely believe in Yang Chendong. Although all the training costs are now paid by Yang Chendong, in fact, the two sides are more of a cooperative relationship. After all, ninjas have been taught for hundreds of years. In their bones, the Japanese Empire is their home, their root. Now they have to live for the people who once destroyed their roots, which is a bit unacceptable from a psychological point of view. On this point, not only was Chushi aware of it, he believed that the other 2 special ninja brothers, Kitamura and Yui Suzuki, were also aware of it. The 3 of them had made a lot of preparations for this. For example, they had secretly accumulated money and made all sorts of preparations to leave the 5-star army. It had to be said that in some aspects, Yang Chendong was very generous. In order to make the ninjas work for him, any materials they request every month will be fully satisfied. Every time he was able to save 20%, it was not a small fortune. Over time, he had accumulated quite a lot over the past few years. Just as he was about to become independent, Blowing Stone received the order to be transferred to the front lines. Because he wasn't fully prepared, Blowing Stone had to say goodbye to his 2 brothers and come here. The last time he was ordered to protect Yang Chendong, Blowing Stone wanted to see if he could use Ivan to kill Yang Chendong. Unfortunately, Ivan was an impulsive young man, he wasn't fully prepared. Blowing Stone thought that even if he wanted to go easy on Yang Chendong, he wouldn't be able to hurt Yang Chendong. This is because they know that in terms of individual combat power, King Wunan of Daemyong is even more abnormal. Although they have never seen him in action, they heard that even the strongest black cavalry can't be his opponent. This can be seen from Yang Chendong's disappearance and the defeat of Yeshin's 30,000 Walla army. This person clearly has a backup plan, in other words, he doesn't fully trust him. Thinking about how he almost believed that this was a good opportunity to make a move, Blowing Stone couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Of course, Blowing Stone didn't know that the reason why Yeshen lost was because he lost to Daikara, not because Yang Chendong was prepared. Not knowing the truth, Blowing Stone thought that he didn't have Yang Chendong's trust at all. Because of this, he also had other thoughts about this mission. In his opinion, this was the method of that person driving the wolf to devour the tiger. To put it bluntly, if the assassination was successful, it would be best. It would help him complete the mission, but if Mandula too really died, as the murderer, it would be difficult for Blowing Stone to escape Herat. In the end, he couldn't avoid death. On the other hand, if the assassination didn't succeed, it would be difficult for him to escape. In the end, he would still die. If that was the case, Yang Chendong wouldn't be sad, because in that person's eyes, he was someone who couldn't be trusted. If he died, then he died. Therefore, this mission was basically a dilemma. If he made a move, he would die, but if he didn't, he would be disobeying orders. Death was the only option, and this feeling made Blowing Stone very uncomfortable. He couldn't help but think of that person, the person who secretly contacted them. Maybe he should consider cooperating with that person. At least the result can't be worse, right? If their leader wasn't Yang Chendong, then Blowing Stone wouldn't have so much pressure. Others can't control his own fate. Thinking of the words that the man had hinted at, Blowing Stone had an idea. At this time, they just walked around the general's mansion, and Blowing Stone finally said, "The situation is clear. Is there any problem if we do it tonight?" "No problem." The two behind him replied softly. "Very good." When Blowing Stone said this sentence, there was a trace of unbearable expression on his face. Once the fight starts, these two ninjas who have followed him for many years won't live past tonight. But even if he knows this, he can't say anything. Just like how Yang Chendong doesn't easily trust others, he also doesn't dare to trust the ninjas under him. Who knows if they have been bribed by Yang Chendong all this time? Ninjas often choose a dark and windy night to make a move, which is more conducive to their actions. Tonight is a good night. Because of the clouds, there is no moonlight. And this is a good opportunity for the ninjas to show their strength. In the general's mansion, Mandula too was standing in front of the map in his study. Others are immersed in the great joy of defeating the 5-star army at the moment, but as the commander of the army, he didn't get carried away by the victory. Speaking of which, in this half-a-month's battle, the Timur cavalry did not gain any advantage. Instead, they lost more than 8,000 cavalry. On the contrary, according to the information they received, they only killed less than 1,000 soldiers of the 5th Astral Corps. This is a complete defeat. It was only because the 5-star army had become a scourge in everyone's eyes. Therefore, in many people's eyes, if they could stall the 5-star army until they couldn't win, it would be their victory. That was why there was this celebration. This battle made Mandula too more aware of the strength and sharpness of the 5-star army. But at the same time, it also made him feel that something is wrong. He had studied the past of the 5-star army before. This was an army that always had a clear goal when they attacked. Why would they fight randomly this time? The battle that had lasted for half a month seemed to be completely random. Even if it was him, he wouldn't command such a chaotic battle. At least they would try to test it, for example, if a lone army went deep into the capital to see if there's an opportunity to take the head of a general and so on. But the 5-star army didn't do this at all. They just kept attacking, retreating, and advancing. This made Mandula too very puzzled, and he began to reflect on whether he missed something. Or the reason why the 5-star army did this is to hide something. But what are they trying to hide? This is the so-called abnormal thing. There must be a demon. The 5-star army doesn't play by the rules. This is what Mandula too can't figure out. And if he can't figure out the situation of the other side, then it's not impossible for him to suffer a loss, or even die. Standing in front of the map, Mandula too didn't move for a long time. He was still thinking about any possibilities. He didn't believe that the commander of the Ross Principality, who defeated the Golden Horde, would make such a stupid move and attack without a goal. Often, the more aimless the attack, the more likely it is that he is carrying out a secret plan. But what is this plan? On the map, Manjulatal slowly moved. Unconsciously, he looked at the Kazakh Khanate to the northwest of the Timur Empire. He seemed to have thought of something. His hand involuntarily moved towards that direction on the map. Assassins, protect the general. It was at this moment that a sudden voice broke Manjulata's train of thought, causing his original inspiration to disappear completely. It was completely disrupted by the shouts outside the door, and it disappeared without a trace. Outside the door, the ninjas finally made their move. But just like what Yushi had imagined before, As an existence second only to Great Khan Amur in the Timur Empire, Mandu Latu's safety was naturally the top priority, so how could he be easily assassinated? The 50 ninjas just arrived at the inner courtyard, but they were discovered by the guards in charge of the general's safety. In a short period of time, the entire inner courtyard was brightly lit. In such an environment, it was no different from daytime. Without the darkness that the ninjas relied on, they were like tigers with their teeth pulled out. They lacked a deadly weapon to deal with the enemy. The 50 ninjas were surrounded in all corners, but none of them were waiting for death. This may have something to do with the education they have been receiving. Even if they die, they will die on the way, and they will not choose to surrender. Without the cover of darkness, the ability shown by these ninjas is equivalent to ordinary elite soldiers. Under the siege of more and more Mongolian soldiers, one ninja after another died tragically in the inner courtyard. Some ninjas even closed their eyes after being stabbed several times. Chapter 1509. In a small courtyard on a street not far from the general's mansion, a black shadow wearing a black suit was sitting there with his eyes closed. He was one of the special ninjas of the Wa province. Just a moment ago, he had led 50 ninjas to sneak out of the great general's mansion. But unknowingly, he had retreated. Yes, he had betrayed his ninjas in order to save his own life. And all of this was not because he was afraid of death, but because he had a greater goal to achieve, such as the independence of the ninjas. In order to achieve this goal, he did not hesitate to sacrifice the lives of these 50 ninjas. And from this moment on, he would temporarily disappear from everyone's sight. He would look for that person, the person who had given them the hint. Perhaps that person was the only hope for them to escape from the great general's control and regain their freedom. In the great general's mansion, the assassination was over after half an hour. All of the ninjas were killed, and the Mongolian army had paid a price of 130 people. From this, it could be seen that the individual combat strength of a ninja was still very strong. Even if they were surrounded, even if they could not show their best side, they still managed to injure their opponents. Manjalatu was inspecting the corpses on the ground under the close protection of his personal guards. After the experienced people confirmed that these were the legendary ninjas of the Japanese Empire, there was not a trace of fear on Manjalatu's face. Instead, he laughed as if he had survived a disaster. He finally figured out why the 5-star army had done so much useless work for half a month. It turned out that this was their purpose. It was to make him relax his vigilance and create an opportunity for these ninjas. Fortunately, he had always been careful and cautious, so he was spared. As if he had finally figured out the matter, Manjalatu's face was full of a sense of relief. He wanted to see what tricks the 5-star army had up their sleeves. At the same time, he wanted to hang the corpses of these assassins on the city wall. He wanted to let everyone know that the Han people had tried to assassinate him. He wanted everyone to know that he, Manjalatu, was not afraid of being beaten, and he could not be killed. The personal guards moved quickly. In just the morning, the corpses of the 50 ninjas were hung on the city wall for all the Mongolians to see. Among them were members of Xianxia's intelligence department. They quickly sent the news back by telegram and asked for instructions on what to do next. Yang Chendong was not surprised when he heard the news. If Manjalatu could be killed so easily, then he wouldn't be worthy of being the 5-star army's opponent. Let them investigate. Check all the deceased and record their appearances and specific numbers. They are all heroes. If they have family members, they should be compensated generously. This matter seemed to have passed just like that. In order to express his anger, Yang Chendong even intentionally sent out 5,000 cavalrymen to search for the main force of the Mongolian cavalrymen, intending to have a decisive battle. Unfortunately, even though Manjalatu was prepared, he still couldn't find anything. On the other hand, the 5-star army didn't dare to advance too far due to the lack of food. In the end, they had no choice but to retreat. Along the way from the Golden Horde, they had already used up 70% of the food they brought. With less than 30% left, before new food arrived, it was impossible for the army to advance without a goal. Unless they could find the main force of the Mongol army and fight them, or they had new rations to replenish their supplies, the 5-star legion could only retreat from here and find a way out. The battlefield fell into a stalemate. Manjalatu looked at this scene silently. He even had a bold idea. Before winter came, if the 5-star army still held on and didn't retreat, he would launch a large-scale counterattack. He wanted to see what kind of fighting strength an army without food and soldiers without enough to eat could have. On the battlefield, the 5-star army's main force seemed to have fallen into a passive state. With the cooperation of Wanyan Hong, Tianhu finally brought the main force of the World Cavalry Army to the outskirts of the Kazakh capital, Akhmo. On a nearby hill, Tianhu used his binoculars and could already see the short earthen walls. He could also see many Mongolian citizens carrying out various transactions within the walls. This is the capital of Kazakh. Tianhu asked with a hint of doubt when he saw how simple and crude everything was. In fact, it wasn't even as good as a village in Crimson City. This was of course not a question, but a sigh. Wanyan Hong saw this and didn't answer this question. Instead, he lowered his head in shame. Evidently, he also felt a bit embarrassed. After all, being poor wasn't something to be proud of. All right, don't be sad. Believe me, once the people of your Wanyan clan become the people of our Yang family, their lives will certainly become better and better. There will be earth-shaking changes. At that time, your clansmen will thank you for generations. Hehe. Feeling the change in Wanyan Hong's mood, Tianhu patted the latter's shoulder to comfort him. Then he said to the 4 division commanders who came with him, "Have you all seen the terrain clearly? Remember it well. We will have a meeting when we go back. Tonight, we will launch the attack." When he said this, Tianhu also felt a bit relieved. This operation is a bit risky. Now that I think about it, I only listened to Wanyan Hong's side of the story. If something goes wrong, I'm afraid that the entire No. 1 Cavalry Army will suffer a heavy loss. It's not an exaggeration to say that the 4 divisions and I might even lose our lives here. Fortunately, Wanyan Hong didn't disappoint him. The matter was finally completed. The target was right in front of him, and he didn't show any signs of vigilance. This made Tianhu very confident about the next attack plan. After bringing the 4 division commanders back to the camp 12 miles away, Tianhu immediately ordered all the soldiers to take out all the food and finish it in one meal. This was to ensure that they had enough energy to complete the mission. In fact, even if they took out all the food, they would only be 70% full. After running continuously for such a long time, the World Cavalry Army's rations had already been depleted. This was the importance of logistics in a war. Since Yang Chendong established the 5-star army, he had never been so worried about food. In the past, when deciding where to send troops, he would always prepare enough rations in advance. In the process of battle, the rations would be continuously delivered through various channels. Even when they were fighting against the Golden Horde and the Rostachi, there were still millions of people working hard. Countless military provisions were sent from the Yang's provinces to the 3 eastern provinces, and then from there to the far eastern province. It seemed that Yang Chendong's war was like a hot knife through butter. But in reality, the credit of the logistics personnel couldn't be less. It was because of the logistics that the soldiers at the front lines could fight the enemy without worry. They didn't have to worry about not having food to eat, clothes to wear if they were cold, or medicine to use if they were injured. But when they entered the Ilkhanate from Eastern Europe, the 5-star army's pace was a little too big. Along the way, many places only surrendered and weren't destroyed. Naturally, they weren't considered Xianxia's territory. And it was because of the instability of their retreat that when the 5-star army's main force left, they quickly went back on their words and didn't recognize Xianxia as their sovereign state. At this time, it was impossible to transport rations from there. If they insisted on doing so, they were afraid that no matter how much they transported, they would be robbed. In the end, not a single grain of rice would fall into the hands of the 5-star army. And it was precisely because the rations were cut off that Mandula II confidently faced the 5-star army and played guerrilla warfare. The 5-star army couldn't find their main force and didn't know where the enemy's main cavalry was. They didn't dare to advance rashly. Otherwise, it would be easy for their retreat to be cut off and they would be surrounded one by one. The 5-star army was strong, and their combat power was incomparable to that of an ordinary army. They even had a pure firearms unit like the Cold Front. If they faced the enemy head-on, they wouldn't be afraid of any enemy. But if the enemy used a sneak attack and made use of the terrain to launch a sudden attack, the 5-star army wouldn't be able to withstand it. Especially in a situation where they were severely lacking in rations, the more they moved, the more they would consume. It was because of this that Yang Chendong placed all his hopes on Tianhu's world's first cavalry army. If they couldn't break through this time, Then they would have to retreat without accomplishing anything. How could Tianhu not understand this? After being a high-ranking officer for so many years, he still had some foresight. Thus, he was even more clear about the importance of this mission. After returning to the camp, he called for the 4 division commanders. The 5 of them discussed for more than 2 hours and finally came up with the most reliable method of attack. In summary, they had to take down Akamo City and lure the enemy back for reinforcements. This would open up a path and opportunity for the 5-star Army's main force on the Eastern Front. As long as they could join forces with the 5-star Army on the Eastern Front, it would be equivalent to having a stable route for the transportation of rations. They could also use this route to continuously send in supplies needed for war. Regarding this point, Yang Chendong had already sent a telegram to the various armies on the Eastern Front 25 days ago to let them prepare. 4 division commanders, the 6th young master is watching us. The entire army is watching us. Next, it's time for the world's first cavalry army to perform. Remember, this time, not only do we have to take down Akamo City, we also have to open up a safe route to the east. This mission will be handed over to the 2nd and 3rd division. Now, as the commander, I give you the authority to act as you see fit. If you encounter anyone who doesn't cooperate, you can end it on your own. You can kill without mercy and don't have to worry about anyone coming after you. If necessary, you can build a few more temples to warn others. As he spoke, Tianhu's body emitted a murderous aura. Chapter 15:10. 2nd Division's Commander Lu Duo and 3rd Division's Commander Hubo stood up and stood at attention. Rest assured, Commander. We guarantee that we will complete the mission. We promise to open the passage as soon as possible and meet up with our main forces in the east. Very good. Everyone, go and prepare. Tianhu nodded in satisfaction. He was full of confidence in his cavalry. 4 hours after the meeting, more than 40,000 5-star army cavalrymen set off. They were only 12 kilometers away from their target. They did not take any measures to conceal themselves. After the order was given, the 1st Division's commander Tai Mu took the lead and attacked. For the world's #1 cavalry army, who were proficient in archery and horse riding, a distance of 12 li was nothing. They could guarantee that even if they were discovered by the enemy, they would not give the enemy any time to prepare for defense. In Akamo City, inside a huge yurt, this was Janabek Khan's residence. Compared to the previous days, his emotions were much more stable. This was because Mandu Latu had stopped the 5-star Army's attack on the Western Front. It was already the beginning of July. They only needed to hold on for 2 more months before winter arrived. If the 5-star Army still couldn't build up their defenses, then they could only retreat. This would give them time to rest and recuperate. Although it was not a victory, since they could stop the 5-star Army's first attack, who could guarantee that they would not be able to stop the second? This at least gave the Khanate's coalition army, which had been losing, hope. It had a strong effect on the army's morale. This was something that could not be bought with money. Thinking that it would not be long before the 5-star Army left dejectedly, Janabek Khan had a smile on his face even when he was sleeping. And all of this disappeared because of the sudden tremors that came from the ground. The smile would never appear again. Report. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. The scouts on the periphery finally discovered the traces of the 5-star Army. However, just as Tianhu had predicted, the speed of the 5-star Army's cavalry was simply too fast. By the time the scout returned with the news, the vanguard of the 1st Division had already arrived outside the city. They were only a stone's throw away from the earth wall. The scout's shout attracted the counterattack of the 500 Kazakh cavalrymen who were on night duty. They all came to the back of the earthen wall and used it as cover to shoot arrows outside. But to the brave warriors of the world's #1 cavalry army, who were like ferocious tigers descending from the mountains, they were completely ignored. In addition, in the dark night, vision was limited to begin with. Many arrows were released, but they were all off target. Not many soldiers of the 5-star Army were injured. The earthen walls were destroyed by the prepared soldiers of the 5-star Army using the huge logs they brought. Without the protection of the earthen wall, the entire city of Akamo was defenseless in front of the 5-star Army's soldiers. Soon after, the sound of countless armored cavalrymen could be heard. At this time, Janabek Khan had just crawled out of his bed. When he heard the news of the five-star army's attack from his personal guards, his eyes widened in disbelief. How could the five-star army appear here? The Ili Empire to the east and the Timur Empire to the west. How did the five-star army bypass them and arrive in front of him? What was going on? Could it be that these cavalrymen flew here? With all kinds of puzzlement in his heart, Janabek Khan escaped under the protection of his personal guards 15 minutes before the arrival of the five-star army. Because he left in a hurry, he did not have time to take many things with him. Even his blanket still had a trace of warmth. The 1st Division's commander, Taimur, was the first to rush into the Khan's tent. When he saw that there was no one there, he strode forward and touched the blanket. He frowned and said, "It's still warm. What a pity." Even the great Khan had fled without any resistance or counterattack, not to mention the Kazakh cavalry in the city. There were less than 10,000 of them, and in less than 2 hours of fighting in front of the more than 40,000 ferocious soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army, they either died, fled, or surrendered. In the end, the 80,000 Mongolian civilians in the city were all captured and enslaved by the five-star army. The battle went very smoothly. When Tianhu walked into the Khan's tent, he was in high spirits. As he walked, he ordered, "Immediately find all the food in the city. Let the 2nd Division and the 3rd Division eat first. After that, let them set out the day after tomorrow. We must take advantage of the time when the enemy is unprepared to kill our way out. Also, call the 1st Division and the 4th Division over. We also need to discuss the issue of defending the city. This earthen wall is really not sturdy. We must immediately rebuild it and use everything we can, including the civilians in the city, to dig trenches. No matter what, before the army arrives, we must be nailed here like a nail." When he said this, Tianhu's eyes were filled with determination. If the surprise attack on Akmo was the first step to success, then defending this place was the second step. It was also the most difficult step. Tianhu could even imagine that once the enemy knew that there was such a nail in their heart, they would not be able to resist pulling it out. When Akmo fell, Janabek Khan only managed to escape with less than 1,000 Kazakh cavalry. When the news began to spread, Mandulato, who heard the news, immediately smashed the desk in front of him and shouted angrily, "Trash! A bunch of trash!" After venting his anger, Mandulato calmed down and felt the threat. He did not know how the five-star army had bypassed his front line. He had to find a way to eliminate them. He absolutely could not tolerate a fierce tiger lying by his side. He also could not allow the five-star army on the east and west to converge. Otherwise, it would be the beginning of a disaster. At this moment, Mandulato finally understood that the crazy and brainless attacks of the fifth-star army in the past half a month were not to cover up those killers, but to attract his attention so that the cavalry of the fifth-star army could pass right under his nose. It had to be said that even though he was very careful, he was still careless and fell into the five-star army's trap. Or it could be said that he fell into the trap of King Wunan of Daemyong. "Men, send out 80,000 cavalry. No matter what, we must capture Akmo City and kill all the five-star army's cavalry there. Kill them all." After enduring for so long, Mandulato finally decided to reveal his fangs. His first target was the world's first cavalry army that was nailed into Akmo City like a nail. Once this nail was pulled out, the next target would be the 20,000-strong five-star army's cavalry that was about to attack from behind and join the five-star army on the east front. Mandulato did not believe that it was only 20,000 cavalry. Could they really overturn the heavens? The same news also spread to the five-star army's camp on the west front. At this moment, everyone knew that the sixth young master's actions had such a deep meaning. Some of the officers who had complained could not help but feel ashamed. For this reason, many officers actually knelt in front of the main tent and apologized to Yang Chendong in person. In response, Yang Chendong only arranged for Beta Persei to come forward and admonish them. He had already investigated and found that these complaining officers had the intention of thinking for the army. No one had any ulterior motives because of this. This did not cross his bottom line, so naturally, he would not punish them too harshly. This was probably the effect of Gray's death. Although there were quite a few people who suspected that Yang Chendong was the culprit behind Gray's death, after considering that he had indeed done something that was not allowed by military discipline, coupled with his frightening arrogance in the later stages of his life, such a person's death was not worth pitying. Furthermore, although Gray had died, he had died fighting for the five-star army in name. As a result, His family had received quite a bit of compensation. With this, they had both money and face, and no one would step forward to seek justice for them. On the contrary, what everyone needed to consider was that they could not easily make mistakes in their work in the future. For this reason, many officers who joined the army later went to check the military discipline of the 5-star army. This was very gratifying. Ely County. King Baoli's face was full of worry, and it lingered for a long time. Ever since his prime minister, Syed Ali Alip, had suddenly disappeared, all the pressure had been placed on him. When the military matters, the local matters, and the pressure exerted by some nobles all came pressing down on him, he quickly had a lot of white hair on his head, and he looked much older. Regardless of whether it was day or night, he dealt with all kinds of matters. However, not only did he not manage to deal with them well, there were more and more of them. This was especially so when he heard that the 5-star army had entered his territory from the Kazakh Khanate. He felt that the pressure was about to completely crush him to the ground. Originally, he thought that with the appearance of the Timur Empire's great Khan, the Khanates would temporarily be united, and more Khanate alliance cavalry would enter his territory. His country would be saved. However, from the looks of it, he had underestimated the 5-star army. Or, it could be said that he had overestimated the so-called invincible Khanate alliance. Truly a bunch of trash. He had the same sigh as Mandula Tuesday. When he heard that the 5-star army only had 20,000 cavalrymen, they had chased Khan Janierb all over the place, causing them to lose most of their territory in a short period of time. When the 5-star army finally arrived behind him, King Baoli wanted to kill this so-called Great Khan of the Kazakh Khanate. What was the point of having a Great Khan who could not even stop the 20,000 cavalrymen of the 5-star army? Chapter 15:11. Sighs were sighs, and curses were curses. He knew that the 5-star army on the Eastern Front was responding to the 20,000 cavalrymen. They were trying to open up a path by attacking from both sides. The 5-star army on the Eastern Front was attacking ferociously, and their momentum was even more powerful than a few days ago. The 5-star army on the Eastern Front was responding to the 20,000 cavalrymen. They were trying to open up a path by attacking from both sides. Humph. There are hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen here. Do you think you can open it just because you want to? Bao Lide's face was filled with confidence when he thought of the 10-kilometer-long trench outside the city that was enough to stop the 5-star army's attack. It was also because of this trench that the 5-star legion's cavalry couldn't charge forward at all, which was why they were able to hold off the enemy for so long. Bao Lide was confident that he would be able to hold off the main force of the 5-star legion this time. As long as he could hold off this wave of attacks, he believed that the other Kaganates wouldn't just ignore the 20,000 enemy cavalry that appeared behind them. Bao Lide was confident that he could defend Ali Mali city. However, what he didn't know was that one of his generals, Wu Liji, was secretly meeting with an old friend. At this moment, he was struggling with whether to surrender or not. When Wu Liji's old friend, dressed in a black robe, appeared in his residence, the great general was given a huge fright. After the shock, he walked over with a face full of joy. "Prime Minister, where have you been these past few years? We missed you so much." That's right, the person who came was Prime Minister Ali Pu. It had been almost 4 years since Yang Chendong had sent people to rob him. During this time, he had been under the surveillance of intelligence personnel. He had been to Xianxia's Qiqian city, Shishir, and other provinces. It could be said that he had been moving around without stopping. These years of traveling had greatly broadened his horizons. Just like what Yang Chendong had said when he met him secretly, his so-called governance was just child's play. Under his governance, the nobles would still be high and mighty, and the common people would still live a life without hunger. Apu had once scoffed at this, thinking that Yang Chendong was just a braggart. At least from what he knew of history, there had never been any nation or country that could eliminate the privileges of the rich and powerful and allow all the ordinary people to live a prosperous life. For example, they did not lack food, clothes, and houses. In his opinion, no one could do this. Anyone who could make 50% of the people live such a life would be a great ruler. If he could make 60% of the people reach the standard, then he would be a great emperor. If he could make 70% of the people reach the standard, then he would not even dare to think about it. However, after visiting for 4 years, he found that Yang Chendong was not just bragging. Instead, He really did what he said. Although the common people's wealth did not reach 100%, it was at least 80%. Moreover, this percentage was still increasing year by year. In other words, as long as they were hardworking people, dutiful people, and people who were willing to work hard, they would be able to live a prosperous life. This was something that he didn't even dare to think about before. Now, someone had actually realized it and even let him see it. This had greatly affected him. How he wished that the common people of his country could also live such a life. That way, even if he died immediately, it would be worth it. But in his heart, he knew very well that this was impossible. Not to mention other things, just the privileges of the rich and powerful were something that no one could abolish. If someone really did this, they would be overthrown by the rich and powerful. Even if he and the king worked together, they would not be able to do it. Even so, a bold idea appeared in his mind. If he could not do it, he might as well give it to someone else, such as the leader of Xianxia, Yang Chendong. After having this idea, Apu quickly shook his head, wanting to suppress it. Wasn't this the same as selling out his country? Wasn't this the same as giving his country to someone else? This was the act of a traitor. Apu wanted to suppress this sudden thought, but after it appeared, he discovered that it wasn't something he could suppress even if he wanted to. This was especially so when he visited other provinces under Xianxia. He saw many common people who had migrated from other places and lived with them. When he asked them whether they still remembered where they were from, whether they wanted to return to their homeland, or whether they wanted to rebuild their country, the answers he received were the same. Of course I want to go home. After all, it's my homeland. But if I have to live a life where I can't eat or wear clothes, I'd rather stay here. Here my family and I lived a good life. We didn't have to worry about our next meal, nor did we have to worry about our wealth being swallowed by the rich and powerful. We also didn't have to worry about our own safety, and whether or not enemies would suddenly attack. This is the life I want. As for the past, forget about it. Just treat it as a memory. That's right, it's a painful memory. When this answer did not come from one person, but from 10 people, at least 9.5 gave the same answer. Apu knew that the common people's eyes were clear, and Yang Chendong's actions were correct. If it was wrong, why would the common people speak up for him? Why would he receive the support of the common people? Why would the common people be truly satisfied to the point where they would forget their homeland and their country? After slowly going from not understanding to understanding, Apu began to believe in his thoughts. Yang Chendong was correct, and this method could also be applied to his country. Although the price he had to pay was the loss of his royal authority, compared to the common people being able to live a better life, it was all worth it. Back then, wasn't his wish to let the common people live a better life? For this, he swore that he would sacrifice everything, including himself. Since there was such an opportunity, what was he waiting for? 4 years later, Apu finally thought it through and sent a telegram to Yang Chendong. He explained his views and thoughts, and was willing to pay any price. He wanted to do something for this matter. Yang Chendong was naturally very happy that Apu was able to think this through. This was also one of the important reasons why he wanted to capture Apu. He immediately arranged for people to escort Apu to the eastern front lines, preparing to return. After receiving the order, the commander of the foreign army, Bai Shuang, received the order and Apu appeared in front of Wu Liji. When he entered the city, even though Apu was in a carriage, he could still see the current situation of the common people through the window. Compared to 4 years ago, the common people here were even more bitter. They were all thin and sallow, and some could even be blown away by a gust of wind. Their eyes were empty and lifeless, as if they were walking corpses. They had no aspirations, no dreams, and no expectations for tomorrow. Compared to the common people of Xianxia, they were all full of energy, and their bodies were broad and strong. They were like people from 2 different worlds. This also strengthened Apu's thoughts. He also hoped that the common people here could enjoy the same treatment as the common people of the other provinces of Xianxia. That's right, in Yang Chendong's words, it was called liberation. It was liberation, it had to be liberation. With this firm thought, Apu met Wu Liji and saw the other party's enthusiasm. Speaking of which, for Wu Liji to have his current status, it was naturally because of King Boride's approval, but it was more because of Apu's recommendation and promotion. In a sense, he was the one who recognized Wu Liji. It was for this reason that the first person Apu chose to meet was Wu Liji. He firmly believed that even if Wu Liji didn't agree with his point of view, He wouldn't betray him. Seeing Wu Liji's excited expression, Apu reached out and patted him on the shoulder. General Wu Liji, is there a safe place? I have something to say to you in private. Oh, there is, please come with me. Wu Liji's expression instantly became much more solemn. He already had a vague feeling in his heart. The two soon appeared in a secret room in the residence. Without permission, no one was allowed to approach this place. Otherwise, Wu Liji's personal guards would kill them for threatening the general's safety. In the quiet secret room, the two sat facing each other. After Wu Liji poured a cup of tea, Apu slowly opened his mouth and gave a general account of his 4 years of disappearance. Wu Liji listened attentively. He was very curious about the 5-star army. He also wanted to see what kind of power could cultivate such a powerful cavalry. Could it be that the Han people were so powerful that they were invincible? Were they so powerful that they changed their strategy? All of this was explained by Apu's words. It turned out that the relationship between Wu Nan Wang of the Great Ming Dynasty and the Great Ming Dynasty was not subordinate to each other. Instead, he belonged to an emerging force. No wonder this was the case. In a sense, Yang Qindong was equivalent to a founding monarch. He belonged to a new power that was constantly developing and expanding based on the Great Ming's borders. In Xianxia's power, there were no so-called nobles and there were no restraints. Once they wanted to do something, they could wholeheartedly devote themselves to it and didn't need to think too much. Just this alone was something that the other old powers couldn't compare to. Just the existence of nobles and nobles had dragged down countless people who wanted to rise but couldn't. To make a simple analogy, power and wealth were not concentrated. Most of the land was in the hands of a few influential people, and the lives of the common people were miserable. In such an environment, no matter how good one's ideas were, it would be very difficult to turn them into reality. Chapter 15:12. The 5-star army didn't have such concerns right now, but no one could guarantee that they wouldn't in the future. Wu Liji also raised his doubts on this issue. Sir Prime Minister, can this King Wunan of Daemyong really eliminate the existence of influential officials? If this is the case, who can guarantee that his position will be stable? Without the support of influential officials, how long can his country last? Does he really have to rely on the common people? Hee, what a joke. The common people don't have their own consciousness. Once chaos breaks out, they won't be able to make their own decisions. All they can do is follow the script. Facing Wu Liji's impolite criticism, Alip didn't argue with him. In his opinion, whether or not Yang Qindong really could eliminate the existence of influential officials wasn't important. What was important was that he had already accomplished this. What was important was that the current King Wunan of Daemyong was his enemy. What was important was that this King Wunan of Daemyong had never shown mercy to his enemies. In this person's eyes, there were only two choices: surrender or be exterminated. There was no such thing as a sovereign state or an auxiliary state. General Wu Liji, if you wish to discuss this matter, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. Let's talk about the current situation first. Right now, the 5-star army's 2 armies are about to converge. Moreover, we are doing our best to stop Li Zheng here. Do you think we can stop this great momentum? Facing Alip's sharp question, Wu Liji didn't avoid it. Instead, after thinking for a bit, he replied, "This time, we might be able to stop them. However, the next time might not be the case. If the 5-star army is determined to achieve their goal, I believe we won't be able to stop them in the end." Good. Alip nodded in satisfaction. He originally thought that Wu Liji would refuse to admit it out of pride and face. Now that he had admitted to this point, the following words were easy to say. Yes, General Wu Liji's vision is indeed far. Even our so-called Khaganate alliance won't be able to stop the 5-star army's cavalry. Without sufficient financial support, without sufficient rear, food, and reserves, our strength will only grow weaker and weaker. In the end, we will lose everything and be defeated here. In comparison, the 5-star army has an enviable rear. No matter if it is food, military equipment, or soldiers, as long as they want, they can continuously supply us. Even if they eventually exhaust us, they can still exhaust us to death. Since that is the case, why do we have to wait until we can't hold on anymore? Why can't we make a decision earlier? This way, We can sacrifice fewer warriors and commoners. This is a good thing to accumulate merit. Even if we take 10,000 steps back, even if we win this battle, what can we get? The Wunan of the Kaganates of Daimyong's territory. If that's the case, our strength will be greatly weakened. Even if the 5-star army doesn't swallow us up, I'm afraid that the nearby Khanate won't let us off. At that time, our citizens will become slaves. Is this what the general wants to see? Of course not. Facing Alip's aggressive questioning, Wu Liji hurriedly denied. Good, since that is the case, then is the general willing to surrender to the 5-star army? Don't worry, I have already spoken to King Wunan of the Great Ming Dynasty. He has also promised that as long as the general is willing to open the passage for the 5-star army to come in, and is willing to surrender and gain military merits, he can guarantee the general's absolute safety and partial rights and interests. At that time, your family will definitely be grateful for the correct choice you made. Many years later, you will also be proud of the choice you made today. Alip finally revealed the reason for his visit. These words were not only for the sake of Wu Liji and his family, but also for the sake of the citizens and warriors of the Kaganates. He didn't want his country to become a sacrifice. If that happened, he wouldn't close his eyes even if he died. Facing Alip's expectant gaze, Wu Liji didn't immediately make a decision. Instead he asked, Minister, have you really traveled for 4 years and met countless citizens who surrendered to the 5-star army? Are they really living well? Yes, I can swear on my life. Facing this series of questions, Alip nodded solemnly. A glint flashed across his eyes. All right, since that's the case, I'll do it for the sake of the safety of my people. Lord Prime Minister, just tell me what to do. Wu Liji said with a resolute and decisive tone. Just from this point alone, he was a righteous person with the citizens in his heart. After receiving Wu Liji's affirmation, Alip let out a long sigh of relief. He knew that his mission was half complete. He already had a plan for what to do next. When the time comes, the 5-star army's main force would also cooperate with him. Alip met with Wu Liji in private. Because everything was arranged by Xianxia's intelligence department, it avoided everyone's eyes and ears, so much so that Bao Lai didn't know about it at all. A day later, he received news that Wu Liji was seriously ill. After so many years of war, countless generals had died. Wu Liji had already secured his position as the #1 general. Now that something was wrong with his body, no matter what, as the king, he had to come and ask about it. 200 palace guards accompanied Bao Lai out of the city and arrived at Wu Liji's mansion. He also met General Korban, the man who was second only to Wu Liji in the army. Oh, General Korban is here too. Bao Lai raised his head and asked. He nodded as a form of greeting and then walked into the room with only 2 guards. He saw Wu Liji lying on the bed. Wu Liji's face was pale, and he looked seriously ill. There was a person in front of him with his back facing the king, who seemed to be saying something to him. The 2 guards shouted as soon as they entered the room. His Majesty the King has arrived. Hearing her voice, Wu Liji forced himself to sit up. With his back facing her, he slowly began to turn around. At this moment, Bao Lai's gaze was completely focused on Wu Liji. He didn't notice the person who was halfway through turning around. With a concerned expression, he asked softly, General Wu Liji, what's wrong with your body? It's only been a few days. How did you get so sick? Just as he said that, Bao Lai's gaze met the eyes of the figure who had turned around. When he saw who it was, he froze on the spot, as if he had seen a ghost. He didn't know what to do. Not only was King Baoli stunned, but the 2 guards he brought with him were also rooted to the spot with a look of shock on their faces. This was because they recognized who it was. Who else could it be other than the Prime Minister, Apal? Prime. Your Majesty the King, it's been 4 years. Have you been well? Apal was naturally much calmer. It was obvious that he had expected this scene. At the same time, 4 bodyguards rushed out from the corner of the room. While the 2 palace guards were still in a daze, they instantly pinned them to the ground. The commotion behind him caught the attention of King Baoli. He turned around and saw his guard being restrained. His face turned pale with fright. He turned around and looked at Apuli. Then, as if he had realized something, he asked, Minister, what are you trying to do? Your Majesty the King, there's no need to panic. We have no intention of harming you. In fact, we're here to help you. Apal said calmly. He pointed at a chair beside him as if to say, "Let's sit down and talk." Seeing Apu's calm expression, King Boride sighed and sat down. Since he was here, he should take things as they came. He understood his prime minister too well. Since he had appeared, he must have made preparations. If he did not cooperate and insisted on shouting, it would only force the other party to do something unfavorable to him. King Boride sat down on his chair. From Apu's eyes, he knew that he was halfway done. Just like how the other party understood him, he also understood the king very well. This was an ambitious king who could judge the situation and size up the situation. He was not an impulsive person. He knew what could be done, what could not be done, and even what should be done at the right time. Please allow me to address you as Your Majesty. Your Majesty, the current situation is like this. As Apu continued to explain, the situation of the entire Khanate alliance became clearer to King Baolid. Akmo City, the capital of the Kazakh Empire. More and more Mongolian cavalry appeared 30 li away from the city. They were like the dark clouds in the sky before a heavy downpour, appearing in groups on this land. The scouts gathered all the information they saw and presented it to Commander Jianghu. One by one, small black flags were inserted into the military sand table that had been prepared long ago. Sir, the enemy is coming at us aggressively. Why don't we take the initiative to attack? 1st Division Commander Taimu stood in front of the sand table and suggested. 5th Division Commander, what do you think? Tianhu didn't reply. Instead, he looked at Division Commander Gong Feng, who was deep in thought. Sir, I think we should hold our ground. If we leave the city now, it will be much safer. However, it will also mean that we have opened up a path to the Ili region. Once the Mongolian army is free, they will be able to attack the 2nd and 3rd divisions. If that happens, they will be in a precarious situation. Gong Feng shook his head. His opinion was different from Division Commander Taimu's. Chapter 15:13. This time, without waiting for Tianhu to ask, Taimu asked anxiously, "Defend? How? We only have about 20,000 men, but the enemy has 80,000. This doesn't even include the allied armies from other khaganates. Besides, our world's #1 cavalry army focuses on offense. Defense isn't our forte." Taimu's words made sense. The world's #1 cavalry army was second only to the Black Cavalry in terms of cold weapons. No matter what kind of powerful enemy they faced, once they became their target, they would not have a good ending. This was a publicly acknowledged fact. However, when it came to defense, they were a little lacking. After all, cavalry focused on offense while infantry focused on defense. This had become a law in many people's hearts and an objective fact. No. Commander Taimu is wrong. We don't only have about 20,000 men. We also have 6,000 captives and 100,000 Kazakh civilians. They can all be used by us. When Gong Feng said this, there was a smile on his face. It was obvious that he already had a card up his sleeve. Looking at Gong Feng's confident expression, Commander Tianhu chuckled. Oh, it seems like our 5th commander has a card up his sleeve. Since that's the case, the task of defending the city will be handed over to your 5th commander. If there's anything you need, we will do our best to cooperate. With Tianhu's words, Gong Feng felt more confident. Thank you for your support, Commander. Since that's the case, this subordinate will try his best. Gong Feng's so-called try was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had already prepared for it. He had carefully studied some of the beautiful battles under Yang Chindong's command and learned many things. One of them was how to use money to buy people's hearts for his own use. Harsenhan had left in a hurry. He had never thought that the 5-star army would suddenly appear in front of his capital. Without any preparation, he had left, but the wealth he had accumulated over the years was left in Akmo City. Now, this wealth was in the hands of the 5-star army. With these riches as capital, Gong Feng piled them up in the largest open space in the city. As more and more Mongolian citizens were attracted by these things, various rewards were placed in front of them, where they could earn riches if they contributed to the war. Using Gong Feng's explanation, it was natural for soldiers to be paid. As long as the commoners were willing to help the five-star army defend the city, then the wealth would belong to them. In order to make everyone believe in his sincerity, everyone who came to watch the fun was rewarded. Some were given silver, some were given copper coins, and some were given refined salt, ironware, and precious furs, tea leaves, and silk. Just by coming to watch the show, they were able to obtain so many benefits. When the local things fell into their hands, more and more citizens began to believe in the five-star army. As the saying goes, facts speak louder than words. With the things in hand, this was the real thing. It was far more effective than 10 or 100 sentences. With the cooperation of the surrendered Mongolian soldiers that Gong Feng had bribed beforehand, the first batch of people stepped forward and expressed their willingness to work for the five-star army. When they expressed their desire to distribute the wealth to themselves, Gong Feng waved his hand and took out some good things in front of everyone. Things became much easier after that. Soon there was a second batch of people, a third batch, and a fourth batch. 10 miles outside Akmo City, General Harbala, who had come under the orders of the Timur Empire's great General Mandaratu, stopped and began to set up camp with his 80,000 men. This time, he had come under the orders of the great general to deal with the five-star army's cavalry. Harbala still had some chance of winning. He had already received accurate information that there were only 20,000 enemies guarding Akamo City. Moreover, Akamo City could not be considered a city at all. It was just a large market surrounded by earthen walls. Without the support of the city walls, Halbara was confident that the Pentastar Legion would not be his match. He was even prepared for the possibility that the enemy would flee the moment they caught wind of the news. If that happened, he wouldn't attack. Instead, he would continue east and cut off the 20,000 five-star army's advance. He would eliminate all potential threats. With his own thoughts and plans, Harbara took the initiative to stop when he was 10 miles away from Akamo. He wanted to create momentum and achieve his goal of defeating the enemy without fighting. However, the development of the situation didn't seem to go according to his plan. Facing the arrival of his army, the five-star army didn't seem to have any intention of retreating. Instead, scouts reported that the enemy was reinforcing the city walls. There were even trenches outside the city that stretched for 5 miles. How dare they? Harbala was furious when he heard the news. Sheep should flee when they see a wolf. This was a law that had never changed. But now, someone wanted to violate this law. How could he tolerate it? Send people to fill in the trenches. We must pave a smooth path for the army to advance. At the same time, urge the other reinforcements to move faster. This time, this general will eat up these arrogant five-star army. I want them to know the consequences of provoking us. I want them to kneel at my feet and beg for mercy. Ha ha ha. Harbala was determined to eat up the five-star army in front of him. In the city, Division Commander Gong Feng wasn't idle either. He was still organizing people to dig the trenches. Under the direct stimulation of wealth, the hundreds of thousands of people in the city who had the strength to do so were mobilized. If the Khanate army had hot air balloons, they would have seen the bustling scene in the city. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Under Harbala's constant urging, not only were the trenches 5 miles outside the city filled up, the first reinforcements of the Khanate army, the 20,000 cavalry of the Khanate of Kazan, also arrived outside Akmo under the leadership of General Hafertel. With 100,000 soldiers and no more obstacles in front of him, Harbala was very pleased with himself. He ordered a good night's rest. The next morning, they would attack the city. In one night, for his own safety and to prevent the five-star army from breaking out, Harbala arranged for 30,000 cavalry to set up an ambush and set up a trap. However, it was a pity that the five-star army did not make the slightest movement until daybreak. Ha ha ha, General, the five-star army must be afraid. Hafertel looked up to the sky and laughed. At the same time, he looked down on Harbala's cautiousness. In his opinion, a two-legged sheep would always be a two-legged sheep. When had you ever seen a sheep that could eat a wolf? Knowing that he was being laughed at, Harbala ignored Hafertel and ordered his 10,000 cavalry to charge. He wanted to take the first merit and prove that the cavalry of the Timur Empire was the strongest. The wall was only 10 feet tall, but under the impact of the huge logs, a huge crack quickly appeared. Then, a gap of 20 to 30 feet appeared, allowing the cavalry to charge through. War drums sounded, and the 10,000 Timur cavalry charged in high spirits. But when the cavalry entered the earth wall, They were surprised to find that not a single one of the 5-star army cavalry could be seen. Just as many of the cavalrymen were confused and didn't understand what was going on, cries of agony rang out one after another. Many of the cavalrymen who were eager to contribute fell into the deep pits while charging and were stabbed to death by the sharpened logs that had been set up in the pits. They were severely injured. "It won't work here. Try from another direction." The captain leading the cavalry roared and ordered the cavalry to change the direction of attack. But without exception, the path forward was filled with deep trenches. In other words, after the trenches on the outside, there were also countless trenches in the city. No one knew how long these trenches were. Akmo City was very poor. It didn't have any proper city defenses, and there weren't many houses that were pleasing to the eye. But it had one advantage, and that was that it was large enough and long enough. Perhaps this had something to do with the fact that the Khans liked to fight for territory. Whenever they arrived at a new place, they would always try to carve out as much territory as possible for them to use. As the capital of the Kazakh Empire, Akmo City was naturally not small. This allowed Commander Gong Feng to have enough space to trade for time. Hearing the cries of the injured soldiers and seeing the countless trenches, the captain leading the cavalry retreated from the city with a headache and reported what he saw to Harbala. "There's such a thing?" The result was completely different from what he had imagined. At this moment, Harbala felt as if his heart was being scratched. The feeling of knowing that the enemy was right in front of him, but he couldn't see or hit them, made him feel very uncomfortable. "Continue to fill the trenches. This general doesn't believe that the 20,000 5-star army can be stronger than 100,000 soldiers." Harbala had no choice but to use the stupidest method, which was to continue to fill the trenches. He didn't think that the 5-star army could make the 100,000 Kazakh civilians in the city work for them. In his mind, his own people were the most unyielding and wouldn't be used by the Hans. Just like that, the 100,000 cavalry dismounted and put down their sabers, becoming engineers and starting to fill the trenches. Meanwhile, the 100,000 Kazakh civilians in the city continued to dig the trenches. One dug and one filled, as if they were in some kind of competition. The original cavalry charge had become a competition, completely going against the original intention of the war. It also bought a lot of time for the 20,000 cavalry of the world's first cavalry army. Chapter 15-14. The digging competition was still going on, and when Harbala put all the cavalry into it, the progress was noticeably faster. On the 13th day, they could finally see the figures digging in the distance. This gave the cavalry of the Khanate a glimmer of hope, and they became even more motivated to work. But at the same time, what made them depressed was that when the distance between the two sides could be seen clearly with their eyes, they discovered that the ones digging the tunnel were not the 5-star army, but seemed to be some Kazakh civilians wearing clothes similar to theirs. This discovery made Harbala very angry. How could his own people be controlled by the Han people? This is a kind of blasphemy. Seeing Harbala so angry, the general of the Khanate came up with an idea, a stupid move. "General, why don't we shout to the people on the other side? Presumably they were forced by the 5-star army. As long as we promise to surrender to them, we can forgive their crimes. On the contrary, if they continue to help the Han people, we will kill them without mercy. I think they will make the right choice, and in this way they will not be used by the enemy." "Oh, good idea, good idea, good idea. Haha, come. Go and shout according to General Harbala's idea. Remember, when you threaten them, use a more ruthless tone. These people are afraid of death. They will definitely not be used by the 5-star army, ha ha ha." Whether it was in Harbala's eyes or in Harbala's eyes, the people were the most afraid of threats. As long as enough pressure was applied, they will definitely yield. And without the obstruction of the trenches, the more than 20,000 5-star army in front of them were like a group of sheep waiting to be slaughtered, and they could do whatever they wanted to them. It must be said that the two generals may be good at leading troops, but when it comes to understanding people's hearts, they are too far behind. At least compared to Gong Feng, they are not at the same level. On one side were 100,000 old and weak people, and on the other side were 100,000 strong cavalry in the prime of their lives. Their ability to work naturally could not be mentioned in the same breath. This is the reason why even though the Khanate's army moved later, their progress was still able to catch up. If this continues, it will only be a matter of time before the two sides fight. But Harbala's wrong move was destined to help the 5-star army. After the local shouts came from afar, the originally tired Kazakh people were suddenly filled with energy, and their digging speed was even faster than before. Before, there was no threat. Everyone was just helping out for the sake of money. But now, after the threatening words of the Khaganate Alliance army reached their ears, the people realized that they had no other choice. Or rather, their fates were completely tied together with the 5-star army. Surrendering in the past. Not to mention whether the 5-star army would agree or not, with the greedy character of the Khanate's army, if they surrendered, the Khanate's army would take all the good things. How many people would be willing to vent their anger on something that was already in their hands? And if the 5-star army, then the army of the 5-star army. This was the Kazakh people's people. They were bound together for good or ill. If it was said that before, they worked hard to dig holes to earn more money so that they could have a better life, then now, they were digging holes for their own safety. At this time, even if Gong Feng didn't give them any benefits, these people would still do their best. Gong Feng also saw this, but he didn't stop giving them benefits. Using the words of his teacher Yang Chendong, any problem that could be solved with money was not a problem. Not only did their shouts fail, but the other side's speed also began to increase. In contrast, the 100,000 cavalry that had been working for dozens of days and nights began to show signs of fatigue. They were cavalry, not laborers. Their battlefield was to kill enemies, not to dig holes. After a long time, some of the soldiers began to complain. The army's morale was shaken, and Harbala's face didn't look good for a day. However, just when he had nowhere to vent his anger, another piece of news came from the front that made him even more angry. One of the Khanate's army, the Ili Brigade, actually surrendered to the 5-star army. The Ili Brigade was the first to become enemies with the 5-star army. At that time, the Khanate's army and the 5-star army weren't enemies. At least, they didn't interfere with each other's business. It was because of the Ili Brigade's request for help that the entire Khanate's army was pulled in. Okay. Right now, all the large and small Khanates were fighting with all their might against the 5-star army. While they were fighting for the right to rule this area, the instigator, Ilahani, had actually chosen to surrender first, abandoning everyone. How could this not make people angry when they heard this? Especially the Khanates that were prepared to divide the Ili Brigade. Not only did they not get to eat the meat in their hands, they also attracted the wolf. It was really like trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. It made people want to cry, but no tears came out. Of course, as a general in charge of the army, Harbala didn't have to think too much about it. He was thinking about how to deal with the more than 20,000 5-star army. Because the news said that after the Ili Brigade's army suddenly surrendered, the 5-star army's main force on the Eastern Front didn't have any obstacles on their way. At this time, they were speeding toward the Kazakh Khanate. Although the news didn't say how many people the 5-star army sent, the word main force was enough to make people vigilant. In other words, once the main force arrived, Harbala was afraid that he wouldn't be able to win. And if he couldn't deal with the 5-star army before the main force arrived, he was afraid that he wouldn't have a chance to make a move. The situation became serious. If Harbala wasn't in a hurry before, he could still waste time with the other side. But now, time had become very important for him. He had no choice but to call the commander of the Kazan Khanate, General Hafertel, to discuss how to speed up the battle with the main force of the 5-star army as soon as possible. Hafertel, who also received the news, also felt the seriousness of the situation. He didn't dare to watch from the sidelines. All 20,000 cavalry under his command threw themselves into the work of filling the hole, striving to fight with the 5-star army in the shortest time possible. Tianhu, who was surrounded, learned about the surrender of the Ili Brigade through a telegram. When Tianhu heard the news, he called Taimur and Gong Feng, 2 division commanders, to share the joy with them. Amazing! Teacher is amazing. He actually instigated the rebellion of the Ili Brigade. In this way, the initiative is in our hands. Division Commander Gong Feng, who rushed back from the front line, after hearing the news, sighed and admired. Of course, teacher is naturally the most amazing. Since the situation has changed like this, and we are not far away from the arrival of reinforcements, let's discuss how to counterattack. To be honest, the soldiers have all fattened up after staying in the city for more than a month. It's time for them to exercise their limbs. Tianhu chuckled and looked at division commanders Taimur and Gong Feng. I agree. General, leave the vanguard mission to our division. You also know that we haven't done anything during this period of time, waiting for the time to counterattack. Taimur opened his mouth and asked for battle. Tianhu didn't immediately agree after hearing this. Instead, he looked at Gong Feng, wanting to see what he had to say. Facing this kind of questioning gaze, Gong Feng nodded and said, "I think it's time to counterattack. Haha, to be honest, for more than a month, we have taken large strides and given up a large area. Now that we have nowhere to retreat to, it's only a matter of time before we counterattack." Haha, no matter what, Division Commander Gong has worked hard. Good, since that's what you mean, then let's discuss how to counterattack. Come, tell me, when do you think it's appropriate to launch a counterattack? Tianhu laughed. He had also had enough of this situation where they were constantly retreating. If it wasn't for the fact that he had been ordered to stay here like a nail, he wouldn't have taken the 100,000 enemy cavalry seriously. Throughout the history of the world's #1 cavalry army, there were countless examples of them winning battles with fewer troops. He had long been accustomed to boasting. The 5-star army was preparing for a counterattack. Halba was completely unaware of this. He was still constantly urging the soldiers to speed up the filling of the holes. For this reason, the soldiers had even changed from 4 shifts a day to 2 shifts, increasing the manpower. As a result, they were able to speed up the filling of the holes. However, the soldiers didn't get enough rest and were generally not in good spirits. At this moment, Halba didn't care so much. Perhaps in his opinion, even if the soldiers didn't have enough energy, but with 100,000 against 20,000, he was still confident of victory. Another night had arrived. It started to drizzle, making the filling of the holes more difficult. Even so, Halba didn't intend to let the soldiers rest. Seeing that he was less than 4 kilometers away from the 5-star army, he could already see them from afar. He didn't want to delay their progress because of the rain. Out of the 100,000 cavalrymen, there were 50,000 of them working in 2 shifts to fill up the holes. Under the heavy rain, their feet were walking on the muddy ground, and they were very tired. After a night, the sky started to clear up. Halba came to the front line and saw that the distance between the 2 sides had decreased from 4 miles to 2 miles. His eyes were filled with satisfaction. Very good. Continue. In 3 days, we can launch the attack. Looking at the Kazakh civilians 2 li away, Harbala swore in his heart that when he defeated the 5-star army, he would not leave a single one of them alive. He would kill them all. He wanted to use this opportunity to tell everyone what the consequences of going against the Khanate army were. Chapter 15:15. While Harbala was still dreaming, the soldiers of the Khaganate army who had been busy the whole day changed shifts. The exhausted Mongolian cavalry returned to their tents to rest. Another 50,000 men entered the battlefield to fill in the holes and pave the way. Tired from the day's work, the soldiers only ate a little when they entered the tent and went to sleep. To them, the temptation of food was not as attractive as the bed. What they did not know was that for many, this sleep meant that they would never be able to open their eyes again. At night, there was a gentle breeze that felt very cool on the body. A division of 10,000 cavalry mounted their horses in the cool breeze. They checked their equipment and prepared to attack at any time. Tonight was the night that Tianhu and the other 2 had discussed the counterattack. No one knew that the Kazakh civilians who looked like they were working hard to dig the deep holes during the day were actually just kicking up dust. The reason for doing this was to confuse the Khanate coalition army. In fact, the land wasn't destroyed, so the cavalry could move unimpeded at any time. How is it? Has the enemy not filled in the holes yet? Commander Taimur rode on his horse. There was excitement and anxiety on his face. At the same time, there was a look of disdain for the enemy. It should be soon. However, once the enemy discovers that the path is cleared, they will react quickly without the deep holes. That is why Commander Taimur must hurry. At this time, Tianhu was also riding on a warhorse. Behind him were thousands of soldiers directly under his command. They would be the second wave of attack to attack the enemy. Rest assured, Commander. This subordinate understands. Taimur nodded. His eyes were bright as he looked forward. He was only waiting for Commander Gongfeng's signal to attack. At this moment, Gongfeng was holding a telescope and lying behind a mound of dirt. He was only about 60 steps away from the nearest enemy. At this moment, if he was discovered, the enemy would only need a wave of arrows to take his life. But even so, It still did not stop Gong Feng from risking his life to take the risk. He needed to have first-hand information. Once he discovered that the enemy had filled in all the deep holes, he needed to immediately send the signal to attack. This rhythm had to be grasped well. If they were late, the enemy would be on guard. If they wanted to sneak into the enemy's camp and cause serious damage, it would be impossible. Holding the night vision binoculars, Gong Feng carefully observed the other party's movements. Gong Feng didn't know how long he had been staring at them until there was some commotion in the other side's camp. He also saw some people turn around and run back. From the looks of it, it was obvious that they were going to report the news. Gong Feng knew that the road must have been cleared. Send the signal, ask the first division to attack immediately, quick. Gong Feng hurriedly shouted to the radio operator beside him. The messenger who received the order quickly lit the torch in his hand and waved it around. 3 miles behind, Commander Tian, who was overjoyed when he saw the flashing flames. The path is clear, we can attack now. Understood. Mu replied excitedly. Then with a loud shout, the 10,000 five-star army soldiers pulled out their sabers. Shouting loudly, they urged their warhorses to charge forward. Throw away the torches, retreat quickly. The torches here had also attracted the attention of the Khaganate Alliance army dozens of steps away. Gong Feng grabbed the radio operator's arm and ordered him to throw away the torch. Then, he pulled him and ran quickly to the rear. Not long after Gong Feng ran away, a series of arrows landed near the place where he was originally at, near the torch that had not been completely extinguished. The ground was covered in arrows. But then, these arrows were trampled to the ground by the charging warhorses of a division. After Mu-Er's cavalry charged forward for 3 miles, they finally arrived in front of the panicking Khaganate Alliance army and began a bloody massacre. Caught off guard, the tens of thousands of Khaganate Alliance army soldiers became lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Facing an uncountable number of cavalrymen of the 5-star army, what they had in their hands were only iron tools used to fill the ground. These could not even be considered as decent weapons. Furthermore, they were infantry. How could they possibly fight against the well-prepared 5-star army? Run! No one knew who shouted first, but it became an order for the soldiers to retreat. In the dark night, countless black dots began to rapidly retreat. In order to run faster, many people threw the iron tools in their hands to the ground to reduce the burden on their bodies. Charge straight through, don't worry about these people. Commander Mu rode on his horse. When he saw many soldiers stop and swing their sabers at the unarmed and panicked Khaganate Alliance army soldiers, he couldn't help but shout loudly. Since they were the vanguard, they naturally had to break through the enemy's camp and kill their courage. It wasn't their responsibility to kill the defeated army. The commander gave the order. The highly disciplined soldiers of the world's first cavalry army quickly adjusted their direction. In groups of a few dozen, they formed an arrow formation and pierced into the Khaganate Alliance army's camp like sharp blades. In the chaos of the night, the Khaganate Alliance army soldiers could not tell how many Khaganate Alliance army soldiers had arrived. Fear engulfed the 50,000 soldiers as they frantically retreated. During this time, countless people trampled on each other. Whenever someone fell to the ground in the process of escaping, even if they were not trampled to death by their comrades, they would be trampled to death by the horses of the world's first cavalry army. The battle had been one-sided from the start. 10,000 cavalry chased after 50,000 infantry and continuously slashed at each other. It was like a monstrous flood that poured into the Khaganate Alliance army's camp. Harbala was woken up from his sleep. When he learned that the 5-star army had launched an attack, his face was filled with disbelief. This is impossible. Didn't they not open up the path? There are so many deep pits. How did their cavalry charge through? General, we have been deceived. The 5-star army did not dig the pits at all. They were just putting on an act. When we filled up all the pits at night, they launched their counterattack. We are completely unprepared and the army has suffered heavy losses. The captain who came to report was covered in sweat as he spoke anxiously. What? Cunning 5-star army. Cunning Han. Harbala couldn't help but roar when he heard this. After shouting a few times to vent his dissatisfaction, Harbala shouted again. What are you still standing here for? Quickly gather the troops and prepare to counterattack. As the cavalry of the Timur Empire, although the situation was sudden, when the general gave the order, many soldiers still ran out of their tents. They picked up their bows and prepared to defend. Just as these Khaganate Alliance army soldiers rushed out and before they could complete their formation, countless black figures appeared in front of them. The ones at the front were the 50,000 Khaganate Alliance army soldiers. "It's our own people." A sharp-eyed soldier saw the identity of the incoming people and shouted, "Release the arrows." Harbala, who had already put on his armor, came to the front of the camp. When he saw the black figures entering the range of the arrows, he didn't hesitate to shout. However, the order was given, but not many people carried it out. It was obvious that they couldn't bear to point their arrows at their own comrades. "What are you waiting for? Don't you know that these are already defeated soldiers? If we ignore them and let them come, we won't have any defense left. Release the arrows immediately." Harbala shouted with all his might. He didn't forget to add, "Those who don't release the arrows will be disobeying orders. Execute." When the word execute fell, the hesitant Khaganate Alliance army soldiers no longer dared to hesitate and released the arrows they had prepared beforehand. The arrows landed on the black figures rushing towards them. For a moment, screams of pain sounded one after another. General Hafertel was among the defeated soldiers. His luck wasn't too good. He was the one leading the troops to fill up the trenches tonight. But as a general, he didn't need to do anything. Under the protection of some soldiers, he set up a tent and went to rest when the sky turned dark. He didn't sleep for long before a sudden tremor woke him up. At the same time, he knew that something bad was going to happen. He immediately retreated with the defeated soldiers. All he wanted to do was to regroup with the main force and then block the charge of the 5-star army cavalry. As long as they were able to stop the enemy's momentum, they would be able to counterattack and turn defeat into victory under the condition that the path was cleared. After running all the way, Hafertel was a bit out of breath. Finally, the main camp was right in front of him. Just when he was about to win, the enemy suddenly released a row of arrows. The soldiers in front of him were shot down by their own arrows. This scene made him want to curse out loud. He wanted to curse his comrades for not having eyes. But at this time, he heard Harbala's shout. He finally understood that this general wanted to kill them in order to protect himself. Behind him was the 5-star army's cavalry that was closing in on him, and in front of him were his own allies who were ready with their bows and arrows. At this moment, Hafertel was caught in a dilemma. If he wanted to fight against the 5-star army behind him, he didn't have any weapons in his hands. In addition, he was in a disadvantageous position against the cavalry. The consequences were obvious. Since that was the case, he might as well continue to charge forward. As long as he could reach his own camp, pick up his weapon and mount his horse, he would have the strength to fight again. "Brothers, we are allies. We are on the same side. Please let us pass. We will fight side by side with you." After thinking it through, Hafertel took the lead and shouted loudly. After his voice reached the camp, the other soldiers also followed suit and shouted. Chapter 15-16. The arrows couldn't stop the infantrymen. On the contrary, the cries for mercy were transmitted into the army. This infuriated Herba greatly. "What do you mean by letting you come over and fighting side by side? I'm afraid that once you come over, our formation will become even more chaotic. The 5-star army will take the opportunity to charge in. If that happens, there's no need to talk about resistance. We'll all die here." Thinking of the serious consequences, Herba's face turned fierce. "Don't let them come over. Let them go back and face the 5-star army. Tell them that we will remember their bravery." Herba's shout was heard by more and more soldiers. When it reached the ears of Herba's group, they almost died from anger. Facing the 5-star army, this bravery will be remembered. But what use is that? Without weapons or horses, how can they be a match for the elite Han cavalry? This is clearly an act of suicide. As for being remembered for their bravery, what use is that? Not many of them will be able to leave this place alive. Who will repay this favor? This is simply forcing us to die. The anger in Herba's heart was completely ignited by these words. If we're going to die anyway, why not drag Herba down with us? That way, we won't be lonely on the road to the Yellow Springs. With that thought in mind, Hafertel shouted again, "Brothers, if we don't move, we'll die. Since our comrades despise us, Let's fight it out with them and let them know how serious the consequences of abandoning their comrades are. Fight it out, let's drag them down with us. The abandoned soldiers shouted with tears on their faces. It was a matter of course for the enemy to kill them. But for their allies to do this to them was too heartbreaking. Since the enemy didn't care about their comrades, why should they care? Thus, Hafata led his men and charged forward with a furious look on his face. Behind them, Division Commander Mu saw the changes on the battlefield very clearly. He had no intention of interfering. This was a scene he was happy to see. As long as the Khanate soldiers didn't turn around and attack him, he wouldn't force them too much. The actions of the 5-star army behind them gave great encouragement to Hafat, Big Mo, and the others. It was as if they had found someone to rely on. Their attacks became even more ferocious, to the extent that the vanguard of both sides soon clashed together. At such a close distance, the effect of arrows was very limited. Finally, Herba and the others who didn't have to passively take a beating began to counterattack. Some of them even stole the enemy's weapons, causing great losses and threats to Herba's army. Shoot, no need to be polite, kill them all. Harbara's eyes flashed with anger. Seeing that the 10,000 men at the front were about to be breached, he hurriedly ordered the other Khanate soldiers to fire arrows from afar. At this moment, he didn't care about who was on his side or who was his opponent. In his eyes, anyone who stood opposite him was his enemy. It's time to charge. All soldiers of the 1st Division, listen up. Charge. Let's show them the power of our 1st Army. Taimur watched as the arrows rained down. Hundreds and thousands of Khanate soldiers died in front of him. The pace of the attack was slowed, so he didn't wait any longer. After giving the order, a total of 5 regiments, 10,000 cavalrymen, rode on their horses and launched a fierce charge. Cavalrymen's charge was different from that of infantry. They were faster, stronger, and more ferocious. After the 10,000 cavalrymen launched a series of attacks, the entire earth began to tremble violently. This powerful movement caused the anti-Khanate soldiers to involuntarily retreat to the sides, especially after a division of soldiers shouted that those who surrender and kneel on the ground could live. One after another, the anti-Khanate soldiers obediently knelt on the ground. This action not only caused Hafertel's soldiers to kneel, but also many of Harbala's soldiers who were standing at the front to kneel down. This seemed to have become a chain reaction, providing an even more advantageous condition for the cavalry to charge. The horses galloped past. As expected, the kneeling Khanate soldiers weren't harmed in the slightest. On the other hand, those who were still standing, those who genuinely wanted to resist, or those who hadn't yet reacted, were killed by the cavalry. As the cavalry charged forward, one figure after another was slashed to death in the darkness. Lines of defense began to crumble one after another. The soldiers could not stop their footsteps from retreating. Anyone who didn't want to die wouldn't use their bodies to block the charge of the horses. Quick, quick! Where are our cavalrymen? Haven't they mounted yet? Halbara roared anxiously when he saw several lines of defense being breached in front of him. Perhaps it was because of his shouts that the first batch of Khanate Alliance soldiers on horses finally arrived behind him. Some of them were still dressed in disheveled clothes, and there was a hint of panic on their faces. But no matter what, they still mounted their horses and held their cavalry swords in their hands. Haha, good, order them to charge. We must stop the 5-star army's attack. Halba was no longer nervous and even a little fearful. Instead, he became much more high-spirited and vigorous. The enemy cavalry is here. Take out your crossbows and shoot the enemy at close range. Commander Taimur also saw the black shadows and the sound of horse hooves in the distance. There wasn't the slightest hint of nervousness on his face as he gave the order. Oftentimes, this kind of cavalry charge was the most brutal. Often, who knew how many corpses would be left behind in a single charge? But all of this was nothing to the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army. Some of them were veterans who had experienced dozens of battles, big and small, and were used to seeing life and death. Even some of the rookies had experienced dozens or even dozens of battles. They were no longer rookies who panicked at the sound of horse hooves. On the contrary, these people's shouts and horse hooves could stimulate their adrenaline even more effectively, causing their blood to surge and allowing them to display their true strength. The 5 regimental commanders received the order, followed by the battalion commanders, company commanders, platoon commanders, squad leaders, and even every soldier received the order. Correspondingly, more and more small crossbows were taken off their backs and held in their hands. Then, the counterattack began. At a distance of less than 40 or 50 steps, the crossbow bolts rushed forward like rain, landing in the camp of the Khanate Alliance's cavalry, causing waves of horses to fall off. In a direct confrontation, apart from the better-equipped black cavalry, even Lang Feng was no match for the world's #1 cavalry army. Not to mention the Khanate Alliance's cavalry, who were in a hurry and didn't make much preparations, and were physically and mentally exhausted. In just a single clash, the first group of cavalry was scattered. Soon, less than 500 of them were left. Then, they turned around and fled, running towards the back. Hold on for me." Seeing that the result of the battle wasn't as evenly matched as he had imagined, and that it was a one-sided defeat, Halba shouted with a dejected face. But in this chaotic moment, such a shout wouldn't attract anyone's attention at all. It was completely drowned out by the galloping of the horses. Seeing that the second wave of cavalry was quickly defeated by the 5-star army, Halba knew that he no longer had the ability to control the 5-star army's cavalry. He had failed. Unwilling to accept this, Halba gathered up the remaining soldiers and frantically retreated under the cover of the moonlight, leaving behind the brave cavalry of the 5-star army on the battlefield. The changes on the battlefield were so fast that it was beyond everyone's expectations. When Jianghu and Gong Feng arrived with the cavalry, the battle was basically over. Apart from the corpses on the battlefield, there were also captives kneeling on the ground. "What's going on?" Jianghu looked at all this with a frown, somewhat confused. Commander Tai Mu rode up to Jianghu. "Commander, these soldiers of the Khaganate Alliance are too weak. We only charged and they were defeated. Except for a few who escaped, most of them are kneeling on the ground, waiting for us to take them captives." Tai Mu chuckled excitedly. This was the battle record of their division, and it wasn't something that others could take away. Thinking that his division alone had defeated 100,000 enemies, this was something that he could brag about. "I see, could this be?" Tianhu didn't dare to believe it completely. Out of caution, he looked at Gong Feng. "Commander, this shouldn't be the enemy's plan. It must be that our division is too brave. It's just that the combat power of the Khaganate Alliance is too low, haha," Gong Feng said with a smile. In this battle, his contribution was not small. If it were not for the success of his plan, the enemy would not have been implicated and the battle would not have been dragged out until now. Now that they had finally defeated 100,000 Khaganate Alliance soldiers, he felt that the burden on his shoulders could finally be lifted. Gong Feng had the same opinion. Tianhu nodded in agreement. "It's not that the enemy is too weak, but that we are too strong. We waited for them to tire themselves out and attacked suddenly. How could these Khaganate Alliance soldiers be a match for our first Sky Cavalry army? Haha, all right. Immediately send the news of victory to the 6th young master and wait for the next order to take these captives into custody." "Oh right, they fled in a hurry, so they probably didn't have time to take the provisions with them. Take them all so we can have a good meal. Haha." Chapter 15-17. They had been surrounded for a long time. Although Harsenhan had left many things behind when he escaped, there were still hundreds of thousands of civilians with them. Just a day's worth of food and drinks was not a small amount. Seeing their stock dwindle, Tianhu did not say anything, but he was anxious. Now that they had won, they had to gather some good things to strengthen their foundation. The army commander gave the order, and the soldiers below began to get busy. All the soldiers of the 5-star army had excited looks on their faces. They had defeated 100,000 enemy cavalry with only 20,000 men, and they had suffered less than 1,000 casualties. This was definitely a victory that they could brag about to anyone. In contrast, Harbala, who had escaped, looked like he was about to cry. 100,000 men had surrounded 20,000 Han soldiers for more than a month, and they had still been defeated in the end. Now that there were only about 10,000 people who had escaped with him, he could even imagine that once General Mandu Latu learned of this news, he would most likely be executed according to military law. But he had no choice but to return. If he went back, he would just die. If he did not return, he would implicate his family and die with him. Halbara led his defeated army back to the Timur Empire, his face ashen and deathly pale. The news of their defeat quickly spread across the land. First, there was the rebellion of Ili, who had surrendered to the five-star army. Next, there was the defeat of the Timur Empire's 100,000 soldiers. This was like adding hail to snow. When the khans and generals of the various khans heard this, it was a heavy blow to their hearts. Many people could not help but wonder if they could still obtain the final victory in this battle. If they did not win, once they were defeated by the five-star army, what would be waiting for them? Would their entire tribe be wiped out? Since that was the case, why not follow Ili's example and surrender now? At least they could still keep their lives. Right. Someone once said that the five-star army would not only spare the lives of those who surrendered, but would also leave them with 10% of their wealth. Who knew if this was true? Akmo's city defense battle was not only a defeat, but it also affected the morale of the army, the people, and the will to fight. Once an army lost its morale, it would be difficult for them to win a battle no matter how many soldiers they had. When this news reached the ears of Supreme General Mandula II, he knew what he had to do. Previously, it was to delay the enemy and deplete the enemy's rations so that they could subdue the enemy without fighting. But now, with the five-star army's main force on the eastern front opening up a path, this method was obviously ineffective. Since the situation on the battlefield had changed, Mandurata had to change his tactics accordingly. His choice was to find a division of the five-star army and engage them in a decisive battle. He wanted to win a few battles first. At the very least, he had to give the other Khaganate some confidence and prove that the five-star army was not invincible. When Harbala returned to Mandurata's side with 10,000 defeated soldiers, he was not immediately executed. Instead, he was given a chance to redeem himself by leading these 10,000 defeated soldiers to act as the vanguard in the battle against the five-star army. Not only that, but he was also given the authority to command tens of thousands of soldiers. This kind of conviction moved Harbala to tears. This was also one of Mandurata's brilliance. He could be completely at ease using such a person. At the very least, he would do his best. To be able to survive and have a chance to perform meritorious deeds was already the best outcome. Harbala did not have any complaints about this. He gladly accepted it, and at the same time, he was prepared to either succeed or die trying. Soon, he received a military order and found out that his target was Meng Yisher's Wu Shugu. Speaking of Wu Shugu, he was once the general of the Golden Horde's Golden Horde cavalry. In terms of personal strength, there was no need to mention his strength. Although in the later stages, Yang Qindong redistributed nearly 20,000 Golden Horde cavalry because of necessity, or perhaps because he wanted to weaken Wu Shugu's strength, as a former general, he still received the lion's share. For example, among the 40,000 men in his Meng Yisher's Golden Horde cavalry, there were 8,000 of them. It was precisely because of these 8,000 Golden Horde cavalry that Wu Shugu was full of confidence. When he led the army out, he would go wherever there was danger. He did not put the so-called Khaganate in his eyes at all. After fighting all the way from Eastern Europe, Wu Shugu had a better understanding of the five-star army. He knew the importance of meritorious deeds. He also wanted to perform meritorious deeds for a better future. As such, when the other five-star army could not find the enemy's main force and were waiting and recuperating, he still led Meng Yisher's Golden Horde cavalry to roam around, searching for the main force of the Timur Empire's cavalry. This was also the main reason why Mandula Tur had set him as his target. Compared to the other five-star army's Golden Horde cavalry, this Meng Yisher's Golden Horde cavalry was easier to track down. If he could wipe out this cavalry division, the 40,000 five-star army's Golden Horde cavalry would be enough to raise the morale of the entire army and let those who were wavering see hope again. For this plan, Mandula Tur had spent a lot of effort. Out of the 180,000 men in his army, he had sent out 120,000 men. With a ratio of 3-to-1 and a familiarity with the terrain, he did not believe that he could not wipe out the five-star army. The Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, hidden in various places, started to become active. However, Yang Qindong did not know about this. First, he was not familiar with the terrain. Although he had sent out many scouts and had a rough understanding of the terrain, there were still too many things that he did not know. It was these places that hid the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. Second, Xianxia's development was too fast. The intelligence department was unable to keep up. It was just like when the Japanese coveted me in Greater China. They had spent 10 to 20 years to investigate and understand all kinds of information. They really wanted all kinds of information. Even so, in the later stages of the war, they were unable to obtain any important information. The development of the intelligence department was not something that could be achieved with money. They needed time and accumulation. Because of these objective factors, when Meng Yisher's Golden Horde cavalry once again tried to probe the enemy's main force and was surrounded, Yang Chendong still did not obtain any information. Of course, this was also partly because of Wu Shugu. It was because of his arrogance that he did not immediately report when he discovered a clue, causing him to be surrounded. At first, Wu Shugu acted as usual and sent out his troops to search for the enemy's main force. Because this was not the first time he had sent out his troops and had not achieved any results in the past, this time, he did not think that it was necessary. At the very least, it could be used to train his troops. Thus, Wu Shugu led out with 40,000 soldiers. When they accidentally discovered a group of 500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, he did not immediately report it. Instead, he went with the idea of exterminating the Golden Horde cavalry and gaining some merit. Thinking about it, it made sense. Facing a cavalry of 40,000 men, 500 enemies was simply too few. It was so few that Wu Shugu did not think that it was a great merit. It was only when they chased the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry for 100 li, and discovered a second group of 2,000 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry that Wu Shugu became more alert. If they could completely exterminate 2,500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, it would not be considered a great merit, but it would still be a merit. Wu Shugu also did not intend to report it. While leading his army in pursuit, he made a wrong decision, and that was to split up his troops. In order to not let the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry escape, Wu Shugu chose to split up his troops and encircle the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. However, what he did not know was that when he split up his troops, his every move was discovered by the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. Behind this Golden Horde cavalry was another large group of Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. In the end, when Wu Shugu seemed to have completed his encirclement, a large encirclement had also formed around him. At this time, his Meng 1st Regiment was also completely surrounded by the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. It was also at this time that Wu Shugu felt that something was wrong when the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry began to appear on a large scale. At this time, because he had been chasing the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, he had already traveled 400 li. At this distance, even if he immediately sent a message to the 5-star army for reinforcements, it would take at least 2.5 days for reinforcements to arrive. However, facing the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry that had been preparing for this for a long time and had 3 times the number of soldiers, how could Wu Shugu possibly have 2 days? He was leading Meng Yisher. To outsiders, he was leading the 5-star army. However, in reality, he was not a direct descendant of the 5-star army. There was not a single proper Han in the entire army. This kind of army would not be taken seriously. Most of the time, they would be treated as cannon fodder. Due to this understanding, Wu Shugu had never thought that Yang Chendong would come to his aid. Therefore, after he figured out that he was surrounded, he directly sent a telegram to Yang Chendong to make up his mind. This time, because of his arrogance, Meng Yisher's army was surrounded by a large number of soldiers. It was impossible for him to break out of the encirclement. Escaping was not his style. He had already decided to live and die with Meng Yisher. He would kill to the last man. He would not surrender. He hoped that Yang Chendong could take care of his family on account of his willingness to fight to the death. After sending out the telegram, Wu Shugu ordered the telegraphers to dismantle the telegram and properly hide it. He also attached a mark to it so that he could find it later. Then, he personally led the 8,000 Golden Horde cavalry and launched a fierce attack on the 2,500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. The enemies outside were eyeing them covetously. If they wanted to deal with them with all their might, they could not be distracted by other things. The 2,500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry had to be eliminated. Chapter 15:18. If one were to say that this was the correct decision, then when Wu Shugu personally led his 8,000 elite golden armored cavalry into the encirclement of the Timur cavalry, it only took 4 hours for the 2,500 enemy cavalry to be completely wiped out. In the end, not even a single captive was taken, all of them dead. While Wu Shugu was dealing with the central problem, the 120,000 Timur cavalry also launched an attack from the outer perimeter. In order to ensure that they had enough time to eliminate the enemy in the center, Meng Yishi began a defensive battle. In just over 4 hours, more than 6,000 corpses and more than 3,000 injured people were left behind. In just 4 hours, they had lost nearly 10,000 golden armored cavalry. This made Wu Shugu's heart ache, and he could see the determination of the Timur cavalry. They must have made up their mind to eat up his Meng Yishi. Even though the other side had already made up their minds, Wu Shugu still led his soldiers in a desperate counterattack. With enemies on all sides, every minute and every second seemed to be extremely long. Finally, when the sky turned dark, Meng Yishi was finally able to take a breather by relying on the weather. However, at the same time, they had paid a heavy price. According to the statistics, another 8,000 golden armored cavalry had died. In less than a day, nearly half of their forces had been killed or injured. This made Wu Shugu realize that tomorrow would be the day of the final battle. He raised his head to look at the moonlight above his head. This might be the last time in his life that he would be able to enjoy the beautiful night. Meng Yishi spent the entire night in despair. The next morning, when the Timur cavalry surrounded them, they began to shout for them to surrender. In general, they said that they were all brothers of the Mongol branch and had a common ancestor. As long as they were willing to put down their weapons and surrender, they would spare their lives, but they would only be slaves. This kind of shouting was destined to be useless. Yang Chendong was a staunch nationalist. Since he dared to use these foreign races, he naturally had his own plans. For example, every foreign race soldier that joined the 5-star army had at least 3 families behind them as guarantors. On the battlefield, if these foreign race soldiers were to surrender or betray them, they would directly implicate those who had guaranteed that they wouldn't betray them. Just based on this point, none of the 20,000 Meng soldiers dared to surrender. Therefore, the persuasion only lasted for less than an hour before it ended in failure. As the general of the death squad, Harbala was furious when he saw that Meng Yi's men were still not surrendering even though they were about to die. Thus, he led his 10,000 men to act as the vanguard. These cavalrymen were all sinners. If they wanted to wash away their sins, they could only prove themselves through bloody battles. This allowed them to have a stronger will than ordinary soldiers, so once they charged, they would be very fierce. Even though Meng Yishi had sent out the same 10,000 cavalrymen, they still couldn't hold on any longer. In the end, it was only when Wu Shugu personally led 5,000 golden armored cavalrymen into the enemy's ranks that they were able to push them back temporarily. In just one battle, Meng Yishi had lost another 3,000 men. Moreover, the enemy had only sent out 10,000 cavalrymen. If the enemy had sent out their entire army, Meng Yishi would have been wiped out in one battle. Even though the situation was so bad, Wu Shugu didn't show it on his face, other than grumbling in his heart. He constantly comforted the soldiers and told them that with the 5-star army's special treatment, even if they were to die on the battlefield, their families would still be able to receive a considerable amount of compensation. Compared to working for others, it was much more worth it. Next, it was time for them to show their loyalty. It was also time for them to seek the welfare of their living family members. The special treatment made all the soldiers fearless of death. Some of them had even made up their minds to die. In any case, they were going to die anyway. Now that they could die on the battlefield and work for their families, it was worth it. With such a mentality, Meng Yishi was able to display a powerful combat strength. With the golden armored cavalrymen sandwiched between them, they were able to display their superiority as elite cavalrymen. This battle lasted from morning to afternoon, repelling 7 attacks from the Timur cavalry. In the end, Meng Yishi only had 8,000 men left. Of these 8,000 men, the golden armored cavalrymen accounted for half of them. In just one day, 4,000 golden armored cavalrymen had died. This made Wu Shugu's heart ache, but when he thought about how it wouldn't be long before he would also follow these people to the Yellow Springs, his expression became a lot calmer. After attacking for a day and a half, even with 3 times the number of troops, they still couldn't completely wipe out the 40,000 5-star army. This made Harbala very angry. This was his chance to perform. If his performance wasn't perfect, he couldn't guarantee that Great General Mandura wouldn't let him off. Therefore, he didn't have any intention to rest. He led the army to launch a new round of attacks, showing an attitude of not giving up until death. There was less than 3 hours before the sky turned completely dark. Harbala wanted to use these 3 hours to completely wipe out the 5-star army. He wouldn't allow any more accidents to happen. For this reason, he sent out almost all the cavalrymen who had never been on the battlefield. These people were full of energy and spirit. A total of 35,000 men against 8,000 tired men. No matter how you look at it, they had a lot of advantages. Brothers, the final moment has come. It is also time for us to show our loyalty to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Everyone, follow me, charge. Wuxia's body was covered in blood. Most of it was the enemy's. He also had 2 wounds on his body, but they weren't fatal. Blood covered his face, making him look extremely ferocious as he spoke. Behind him were 4,000 golden-armored cavalrymen. Almost all of them were covered in blood, and some of them were already very weak from the continuous battles. Although they were on the defensive side, they were only on a small hill. If it wasn't for this small terrain advantage, they would have been swallowed up by the enemy long ago. However, for 40,000 cavalrymen, a small hill was not enough. They were able to hold on until now because of their strong will. They believed in the 5-star army's powerful intelligence network. The results of this battle would definitely be reported to the wise King Wunan of Daemyong. If they could kill more enemies now, their families would be rewarded more after they died. For this matter, everyone put their lives on the line. Under the circumstances where they were outnumbered and the terrain was unfavorable to them, they paid the price of 30,000 men to heavily injure the enemy. This was already a very difficult matter. The 4,000 golden-armored cavalrymen stood on their horses, looking forward. They had already lost count of how many times they had charged, and they had long regarded death as nothing. Perhaps in their hearts, death was a form of relief. Behind the golden-armored cavalrymen were the 4,000 ordinary soldiers. Before this, some of them had never killed anyone before. However, in just over a day, they had experienced almost all the cruelty that could be experienced. Right now, they could proudly tell everyone that they were already veterans who had experienced the cruelest battles. If these people could survive and recuperate for a while, they would become the backbone of the army. However, they knew that living was already a luxury for them. They did not dare to have any hope. Upon hearing Wuxia's words, the 8,000-some cavalry raised their sabers and looked at the tens of thousands of enemy cavalry approaching. The panic in their eyes had long since disappeared, replaced by a will to die, an indifference, an attitude that did not matter to death. Wait! Just when the morale of the army was at its lowest, just when the 8,000 men were about to lose all hope, just when they wanted to shed their blood on the battlefield, suddenly, Commander Wuxia's words pulled everyone back from the brink of death. Look, what is that? It seems to be our reinforcements. Yes, it's the reinforcements. Look, they are holding up the 5-star flag. Our reinforcements are here. Brothers, we are saved. More and more people saw the green flood coming from afar. Although they were too far away to see how many people there were, just by looking at the imposing manner and the many flags that were raised, they were afraid that there would be a lot of people coming. In less than 2 days, the 5-star army's reinforcements had actually appeared. This was indeed out of Wuxia's expectations. Of course, this was good news. This was the hope for him to bring his brothers out of the encirclement. This was the chance for his Meng Yi to stand tall in the 5-star army. With the sudden appearance of the reinforcements, the 8,000 soldiers of the Meng 1st Regiment, who were prepared to die, finally saw a glimmer of hope. It was as though in an instant, everyone was brimming with energy, and they could charge into the enemy camp once more. However, when the same thing fell into Harbala's eyes, it made him extremely angry and fearful. This time, the matter of dealing with Meng Yi was a top secret. The location chosen was also decided by General Mandu La 2-3 days ago. The news could not have been leaked. Then how did the 5-star army's reinforcements know about this matter? Could it be that they already knew about this matter and did not make a move for a long time because they were waiting for an opportunity? Now that they felt that the opportunity was ripe, they did not hide anymore and jumped out. Was it to completely destroy them? Or was it that the 5-star army's legendary communication device that could spread the news over a long distance had taken effect? Was it because they were surrounded that the news was spread? But if that was the case, the reinforcements should not have arrived so quickly. They had investigated beforehand and the nearest 5-star army's reinforcements were 400 li away. How could they arrive in such a short time? Chapter 15:19. All kinds of guesses and thoughts filled his mind. His expression changed again and again. He realized that he could no longer grasp the situation of the five-star army. It was only when a chilly arch beside him reminded him that his soul returned to normal. General, the five-star army's reinforcements are here. They seem to have a lot of flags and a lot of people. What should we do? What should we do? Should we kill them or not? If we kill them, the five-star army's reinforcements might arrive before they could completely wipe out the Meng 1st Division. If that happened, would their main force be able to retreat safely? If they didn't fight and retreated now, it would be difficult to explain to General Mandula Tuesday Harbala was already a guilty general, and if he was punished for both crimes, it was easy to imagine what kind of punishment he would receive. But no matter what the outcome was, it was related to Harbala's life. It was best for him to make the decision. Harbala's expression was conflicted after being reminded by the lieutenant. If we fight, we might be wiped out. If we don't fight, we will definitely be beheaded. But the good thing is that we can guarantee the safety of the army. One was that he might die, the other was that everyone might die. It was a difficult choice. But seeing the five-star army's reinforcements getting closer and closer, he didn't have much time to think. In the end, he gritted his teeth and said, "The five-star army's reinforcements are coming. We can't fight them head-on. We have to retreat immediately." Perhaps Harbala was a general who cared about the big picture. He knew he couldn't do it, but he didn't do it. Or perhaps he was scared by the five-star army. In the end, he gave the order to retreat. He gave up on the attack in front of him and left the 35,000 cavalry behind to cover the retreat of the army. "Commander, the enemy is escaping." A general of the Golden Armored Cavalry saw that Harbala was about to retreat and said anxiously, Wait. Is the radio station not ready yet?" This time, Wuxia didn't act rashly and shouted behind him. When he saw the reinforcements appear, he knew that it must be the work of the radio station that he looked down on. Considering that he had dismantled it after sending the report, he regretted it so much that his intestines were clear. If he had known that this thing had such a use, he would have definitely maintained contact with the outside world. Now, he was anxious to know what had happened outside and how many reinforcements had arrived. Should he take the initiative to attack, or should he bide his time? The radio operator in charge of communication had studied the system in Xianxia City before. He could be considered the only Han Chinese in the entire Meng 1st Military Division. In order to protect him, no matter how cruel the bloody battle was, they didn't let him charge with the army. Instead, they arranged for the Golden Armored Cavalry to protect him. This effort finally paid off. In a short time, the radio operator dug out the radio station hidden in the ground and connected it. Then, he received a telegram from the five-star army's main force. After the content was translated, the radio operator's expression still had a trace of nervousness. He quickly came to General Wuxia's side and said anxiously, "Commander, there is a telegram from above. It says that the reinforcements are only 3,000 cavalry. If there is a suitable opportunity, they hope that we can cooperate with them to break out of the encirclement." 3,000. Wuxia was shocked when he heard the answer. He then looked in the direction of the reinforcements in disbelief. Indeed, he saw banners fluttering in the wind and shadows everywhere. It didn't seem like 3,000 cavalry at all. However, since the radio station said so, he had no choice but to believe it. He couldn't help but feel relieved that he didn't order the army to charge. Fortunately, he didn't launch an attack. If he took the initiative to fight, the Timur cavalry would have to fight even if they didn't want to. Once they discovered that there were only 3,000 reinforcements, not only would he not be able to escape, even the 3,000 reinforcements would be surrounded and killed. Fortunately, he didn't make a wrong decision rashly. Then, Wuxia immediately led the army in the direction of the reinforcements. All the wounded soldiers were tied to the war horses. Although the journey was still bumpy, it was fortunate that they were able to escape. In the past, when they followed the other kaganates, once they became wounded, they would be abandoned. They wouldn't be allowed to follow the army, let alone treat them. Just from this point alone, who knew how many people were envious of the five-star army's treatment of their soldiers? Among them were their own soldiers, but also their enemies. The reinforcements were the 3rd Legion's Nuzan Cavalry Division. They were personally led by Division Commander Yella. 3,000 cavalrymen brought out all the flags of the 3rd Legion in order to confuse and intimidate the enemy. In terms of horsemanship, the Nuzan Cavalry Division's soldiers were outstanding. Their soldiers could sleep on their horses and travel through the night without getting tired. As long as there were enough war horses, they could create a miracle of speed. After learning that Meng Yi was surrounded, Yang Chendong immediately thought of this Nuzan Cavalry Division. He then ordered them to quickly provide reinforcements and requested Division Commander Wu Shang to cooperate fully. As a result, the 3,000 soldiers with the best horsemanship were selected. Each of them brought 4 horses and rushed over through the night with the flags of the entire army. After having a specific target, they didn't disappoint and arrived at the battlefield at the most crucial time. Naturally, the fact that Wu Shugu led his troops to fight to the death was inseparable from the fact that they were able to complete this mission. Therefore, when the 2 division commanders met, they immediately complimented each other. Division Commander Wu Shugu expressed his gratitude. Division Commander Yella expressed his admiration for Meng Yi's fighting spirit. In the end, everyone was happy and the 2 armies met up and rushed back. This scene was finally witnessed by the dozens of Timur cavalry scouts who were following behind them. When they saw that the 5-star army's reinforcements were only 3,000 people, they were shocked and quickly reported this news to General Harbala. Originally, Harbala was glad that Meng Yi didn't chase after him. Otherwise, he would have to sacrifice some of his cavalrymen. However, when he heard that the reinforcements were only 3,000 people, he was so angry that he fell off his horse. Before he fainted, he knew that he was going to die this time. If the number of reinforcements from the 5-star army was larger, General Mandula too might have thanked him for bringing back the main force of the army, and he might have been able to survive. But now, only 3,000 reinforcements were enough to scare his 80,000-strong army into fleeing. This was a mistake in his strategy. To put it bluntly, this was caused by his cowardly personality. Because of this, even if the general wanted to save his life, he wouldn't let him off this time for the sake of military discipline. Harbala's fainting caused them to lose all hope of chasing after the 5-star army. Although there were other generals in the army, they also had a certain amount of military power and could give orders. But who knew if this was a ploy by the 5-star army? Those 3,000 people were just there to confuse them. What if there were more reinforcements waiting for them? In any case, someone had already taken the blame for this failure. They only needed to retreat safely. Just like that, the 80,000 Timur cavalrymen quickly retreated. But what they didn't know was that in the sky, the 5-star army's air force was secretly monitoring their every move. Letting the air force deal with the fleeing Timur cavalrymen was still too weak. Their mission wasn't to attack from the air, but to keep an eye on these people and find where the Timur cavalry was resting. This would serve as a guide for the encirclement. This was naturally an order given by Yang Chendong himself. This time, Mandula too made the first move. With his personality, there was no reason for him to suffer a loss. The following counterattack was inevitable. Not only that, after Yang Chendong received Wu Shugu's farewell telegram, he sent a telegram to the 5-star army's new army to speed up and attack the Timur Empire's territory from the east. He was always the one who took the initiative to attack and set up traps. This time, he was actually tricked by the other party. Yang Chendong had to vent his anger no matter what. The commander of the new 3rd Army, Su He, rushed all the way here after receiving the order. He became the first 5-star army to arrive at Akamo City, and successfully joined forces with the world's #1 cavalry army that had stayed behind to guard the city. These 2 armies that had been secretly competing with each other and comparing their military exploits all the time finally met. After Tianhu and Su He met, they couldn't help but punch each other's shoulders. This wasn't meant to fight, but rather a different way of showing respect and friendliness. The 2 strongest armies met. After some discussion, they joined forces and headed south from Akamo City. Their first target was the Kazan Khanate. First, it was to teach the other party a lesson. This Khanate had previously sent 20,000 cavalrymen with Hayfertel as its general to cause trouble for the world's first cavalry army. Second, once they occupied or controlled the Kazan Khanate, it would be the same as cutting off the Timur Empire's path to the Eastern Khanates. Then, the Timur Empire would become a lone army, a piece of meat in the 5-star army's bowl. They could eat it whenever they wanted. Harbala finally woke up on the way back, but soon after, he returned to Herat city. Here, he met great General Mandaratu, and was beheaded in public for the crime of not advancing in fear of the enemy. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.